It's my show, ding dong. It's my show, ding dong.
Hello, I'm Left Hand Stu. It is October 14th, 2024. Hello, Thanksgiving Monday. It was supposed to be my day off. I'm gonna need a double Thanksgiving Monday. Caffeine to the hit today. I've got my first drink. My day off. Shut up, Pete. All right. Got both energy. I've got an energy drink. I've got a Dr. Pepper. We're ready to go. Yes, sorry. This is what it sounds like in my head all day today. Just screaming. So, I mean, at best, no, I didn't get a haircut. No haircut. Maybe just push back. Maybe it's just extra greasy. Because I didn't have time to wash my hair today. I was gonna do that today, and that's like usually that's not like a thing where like I'm like I need to, but it was like I haven't washed my hair in a couple days. I'll wash it at Thanksgiving Monday because I'll have so much time in the morning. Nothing happens on a Thanksgiving Monday morning, and then comes along Stephen Hoff's tweet at about 6 a.m. to ruin everything. So I awoke this morning to news. The government of Canada had informed the Indian government, the Indian High Commission, and other diplomats were persons of interest, quote unquote, in an investigation. The High Commission obviously strongly rejected that accusation. This is the do this so I can zoom in. This is the statement. So this was the first thing, basically. So like this was the first thing I think like anyone had, that alerted anyone that anything was happening. So this is the statement that sort of kicked everyone's morning off, depending on when you woke up after. I'm assuming or I'm hoping you had a nice turkey day. Probably slept in due to tryptophan-related drowsiness. Just full on, the missile is eepy. So here's the statement. I keep getting distracted. So we've received a diplomatic communication from Canada yesterday suggesting that the Indian High Commissioner, and other diplomats are persons of interest in a matter related to an investigation in that country. The government of India strongly rejects these preposterous imputations and ascribes them to the political agenda of the Trudeau government that is centered around vote bank politics. Since Prime Minister Trudeau made certain allegations in September 2023, which is referring to when Prime Minister Trudeau stood in the House of Commons and alleged that the missile knows where it is. I love that video. So the allegations of September 2023 were the allegations that Trudeau made that there was evidence that the this goddamn chair. There was evidence that the Indian government was involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who is a prominent Sikh activist in Canada. He was killed outside of his Gurdwara in Surrey, BC. The previous, it was in the summer. When was Nijjar killed? All this to find out if it was June or July. June 18, 2023. He was gunned down outside of his Gurdwara in Surrey, BC. So those are the allegations. So since then, the Canadian government has not shared a shred of evidence with the government of India, despite many requests from our side. This latest step, apparently that is not true. Apparently the Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister and Assistant Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister flew to a third country to present the evidence to India, and they rejected it and like this happened over the weekend. Like those two people were testifying at the foreign interference inquiry, I think on Thursday. And they apparently just like left their testimony to go immediately, which is kind of ironic, immediately from testifying on foreign interference to then go and present evidence to the Indian government of what seems to be one of the like most serious and concrete and wide-ranging. We've got to put a lot of qualifiers on there because there's a bunch of other sort of foreign interference things that are, you could argue, are more of one of those things. Allegedly, yeah. I think that would be possibly a fair. Well, I mean, I don't know if terrorism, but definitely transnational repression, I think, would be the academic term. So sorry, I keep getting distracted. See, this is why I'm in print. The Canadian government has not shared a shred of evidence. Apparently, that's not true. This latest step follows interactions that have again witnessed assertions without any facts. This leaves little doubt that on the pretext of investigation, there is a deliberate strategy of smearing India for political gains. Prime Minister Trudeau's hostility to India has long been in evidence. In 2018, his visit to India, which was aimed at currying favor with a vote bank, rebounded to his discomfort. Well, one of the ways it rebounded to his discomfort was because he was, like, maybe one could argue a little bit too excited to embrace Indian culture, would be one way of describing what happened. There was also the other thing. There was, I think, they invited someone on the trip who had been, like, accused of, like, an assassination attempt or had been involved in an assassination attempt. Which I think was a little bit more serious than the costumes, for lack of a better word. I don't want to say costumes, but I was gonna replace that with traditional garb, but that always, I don't like that term because it's always like, what do you mean garb? When do you ever, other than when it's like foreign clothes, do you use the term garb? But you know what I mean. When he was, I don't know the term. Someone help me with garments. When he was wearing the Indian garments, the traditional Indian garments. I think there you go, Chimera. That's a good. I like garments, because while not used all that much, is a more like. Like garment feels like the right term. His cabinet has included individuals. We're never going to get through this statement. There's so many more statements. His cabinet has included individuals who have openly associated with an extremist and separatist agenda regarding India. His naked interference in Indian internal politics in December 2020 I don't know what that's referring to. If someone knows what that means, showed how far he was willing to go in this regard. That his government was dependent on a political party whose leader openly espouses a separatist ideology vis-a-vis India. I'm assuming that's regarding, they're referencing Jagmeet Singh, or that's who they're talking about in that. I mean, I don't know who else they could be talking about there. Only aggravated matters. Under criticism for turning a blind eye to foreign interference in Canadian politics, his government has deliberately brought in India in an attempt to mitigate the damage. This latest development targeting Indian diplomats is now the next step in that direction. It is no coincidence that it takes time as Prime Minister Trudeau to depose. It is no coincidence that it takes place as Prime Minister Trudeau is to depose before a commission on foreign interference. It also serves the. But what is that? But to what end? Why is also? Isn't this literally that's? It is no coincidence that it takes place as Prime Minister Trudeau is to depose before a commission on foreign interference. Where have I seen that exact language before? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? It is not a coincidence that this latest spat with India comes literally 1 day before the PMO and 2 days before Justin Trudeau. Things that make you go, It also serves the anti-India separatist agenda that the Trudeau government has constantly pandered to for narrow political gains. To that end, the Trudeau government has consciously provided space to violent extremists and terrorists to harass, threaten, and intimidate Indian diplomats and community leaders in Canada. This has included death threats to them and to Indian leaders. All these activities have been justified in the name of freedom of speech. I need to move because I can't see half this goddamn screen right at the edge. Some individuals who have entered Canada illegally have been fast-tracked for citizenship. Multiple extradition requests from the government of India in respect of terrorists and organized crime leaders living in Canada have been disregarded. High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma is India's most senior serving diplomat with a distinguished career spanning 36 years. He has been ambassador in Japan and Sudan while also serving in Italy, Turkey, Vietnam, and China. The aspersions cast on him by the government of Canada are ludicrous and deserve to be treated with contempt. The government of India has taken cognizance of the activities of the Canadian High Commission in India that serve political agenda of the current regime. This led to the implementation of the principle of reciprocity in regard to diplomatic representation. India now reserves the right to take further steps in response to these latest efforts of the Canadian government to concoct allegations against Indian diplomats. So yes, that was what started off the morning. And then, as the morning progresses, we hear the RCMP is going to do a press conference on this, which, just the fact they were doing the press conference, I'm like, huh? Because, I don't know if I've talked about this before, but sometimes Canadian officials across the board can be a little cagey when it comes to sharing information. Even at times when there's not really an obvious explanation for why they're not just telling you. So we'll jump to that because as the day was going on, we started to hear that the Indian ambassador and 5 other Indian diplomats. We first heard that India had recalled them, and now it seems that they were made persona non grata earlier this morning or yesterday. So I think it's very, we'll figure it out as we go. I was on deadline. I had to write stuff today, so it's like I was trying to pay attention to this at the same time.
Situation is compelling us to speak about what we have discovered in our multiple ongoing investigations into the involvement of agents of the government of India in serious criminal activity in Canada.
So basically,
it's not our normal process to publicly disclose information about ongoing investigation in an effort to preserve their integrity. However, we feel it is necessary to do so at this time due to the significant threat to public safety in our country.
Also, this is on 1.25 speed, just to put that out there so everyone knows, just because we all only have so much time.
The past few years, and more recently, law enforcement agencies in Canada, including the RCMP, have successfully investigated and charged a significant number of individuals for their direct involvement in homicides, extortions, and other criminal acts of violence.
Homicides, plural. And that was also in the press release, as in not just Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
In addition, there has been well over a dozen credible and imminent threats to life, which have led to the conduct of duty to warn by law enforcement with members of the South Asian community and specifically members of the pro-Palestinian and charged a significant number of individuals. We feel it is necessary to do so at this time due to the significant threat to public safety in our country. Over the past few years, and more recently, law enforcement agencies in Canada threats to life, which have led to the conduct.
So it said over the past few years and more recently. So that 12 number, I can't tell. I'm not sure if that's. I think it might get clarified in the Q&A. But from what I had read, it had been that those 12 sort of warnings had come either around the same time as the killing or since Trudeau made the allegations in Parliament.
Of duty to
Or
warn.
at least there was, even if the 12 number isn't the number, there was a significant increase in the sort of the threat level, as it were, since then.
Law enforcement with members of the South Asian community and specifically members of the pro-Khalistan movement. As a result, in February
Also,
2024,
Chimera, I don't know why
the
that got
RCMP
held, but yes, this
created a
is in
multidisciplinary
relation
team to
the murder
investigate
of,
and coordinate efforts to combat this threat.
and a whole lot of
The
other
team
things,
has learned a
apparently.
significant amount of information about the breadth and depth of criminal activity orchestrated by agents of the government of India and consequential threats to the safety and security of Canadians and individuals living in Canada. Despite law enforcement's action, the harm has continued, posing a serious threat
Don't
to
do
our
that,
public safety.
Nathaniel.
We reached a point where we felt it was imperative to confront the government of India and inform the public about some very serious findings that have been uncovered through our investigations. There's a violent extremist threat in Canada that Canada and India have been working on over the years. However, these threats are impacting Canada and India's ability to collaborate. Earlier this week, RCMP Deputy Commissioner of Federal Policing made attempts to meet with the Indian law enforcement counterparts.
Because, like, I just don't
to discuss
understand.
violent extremists occurring.
I don't understand what the correlation is there. If anything, it's going to draw more attention to it, and he's going to be asked direct questions while I see this. I always do this thing where I'm like 99% sure he's going to be under oath. So it's like, why if this was like the people I would maybe give a 1% more of a a empathetic reading to are the people who would be like, oh, he's doing this to distract from the leadership stuff, because at least there I could understand what would be the K bono of that situation. It's to distract from the thing. Okay, I can see that logic, but again, that would be very stupid and would involve way too many people doing a lot of really stupid things. That I'm just like, give your goddamn head a shake. I think probably what's happening is they tried to do this quietly, and then the Indian government just started airing out the dirty laundry in public, and then kind of forced everyone's hand. Because it does seem from a lot of the subtext here that it seems like the Canadian government was maybe doing everything it could so it didn't go to this point. Maybe that's too charitable of a reading, but I don't think this is happening to try and distract from anything, and I don't understand why doing it now, 2 days before Trudeau testifies at the foreign interference inquiry, would, unless you're arguing that it's being done so that he isn't asked about China or Russia, which, as someone who's following this and the people who are the have party status who can cross-examine witnesses, for the ones that are representing the Chinese diaspora or the Uyghur diaspora or the Russian diaspora or whomever, or even the Conservative Party, they stick to the stuff they care about. They're it's almost a much better way to do it, where it's like you can have those representatives for those very specific sort of vantage points and perspectives asking these questions, so that there's it may take a little bit more time, but covering a whole lot of different ground, a whole lot more ground, I think, that way. So I don't think in any way there's even that would work either. And I've almost given that conspiracy too much credit by even discussing it in this much detail.
In Canada and India, and present evidence pertaining to agents of the government of India's involvement in serious criminal activity here in Canada. Unfortunately, these attempts were unsuccessful. Therefore, Deputy Commissioner met with officials of the government of India alongside with the National Security Intelligence Advisor and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs over the weekend. Through our national task force and other investigative efforts, the RCMP has obtained evidence that demonstrates four very serious issues. 1, violent extremists impacting both countries. 2, links tying agents of the government of India to homicides and violent acts. 3, the use of organized crime to create perception of unsafe environment targeting the South Asian community in
All
Canada.
right, sorry. I'm
And the
just
4th,
skipping back.
interference in both countries. Evidence that
Because
advisor
we were talking
and Deputy
over this.
Minister of Foreign Affairs over the weekend. Through our national task,
So yeah, so this is the
unfortunately, these attempts were unsuccessful to collaborate investigations. There's a violent extremist threat in Canada that Canada and India have been working on over the years. However, these threats are impacting Canada and India's ability to collaborate. Earlier this week, RCMP Deputy Commissioner of Federal Policing made attempts to meet with the Indian law enforcement counterparts to discuss violent extremists occurring in Canada and India and present evidence pertaining to agents of the government of India's involvement in serious criminal activity here in Canada.
oh, so it's the RCMP person.
Unfortunately, these attempts were unsuccessful. Therefore, Deputy Commissioner met with officials of the government of India alongside with the National Security Intelligence Advisor and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Oh, okay.
Over the
so
weekend.
that's who it was.
Through our national task force and other investigative efforts, the RCMP has obtained evidence that demonstrates 4 very serious issues. 1, violent extremists impacting both countries. 2, links tying agents of the government of India to homicides and violent acts. 3, the use of organized crime to create perception of unsafe environment targeting the South Asian community in Canada. And the 4th, interference in democratic processes. Investigations have revealed that Indian diplomats and consular officials based in Canada leveraged their official position to engage in clandestine activities,
Amity,
such
what are you
as
doing?
collecting information for the government of India, either directly or through their agents, and other individuals who acted voluntarily or through coercion. Evidence also shows that a wide variety of entities in Canada and abroad have been used by agents of the government of India to collect information. Some of these individuals and businesses were coerced and threatened into working with them.
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Thank you. Thank you.
Government of India. The information collected by the government of India is then used to target members of the South Asian community. This evidence was presented directly to the government of India
super
officials,
appropriate
urging their
for
cooperation
right
in
now.
stemming the violence and requesting our law enforcement agencies work together to address this issue.
Exactly.
The RCMP is hoping to address these threats through our relationship with the government of India and the National Investigation Agency, with the end goal of strengthening the safety and security of the Canadian public and South Asian community. The safety and security of our citizens, regardless of their background or belief, remains a top priority for the RCMP, and we will not tolerate any form of intimidation, harassment, or harmful targeting of communities of individuals in Canada. We are seeking the public's attention, assistance in reporting incidents of foreign interference by the government of India. Anyone who feels threatened online or in
It's
person
interesting
should
that he
report the
keeps
incident to
saying
local
South
police.
Asian community.
If someone is in immediate danger,
when it
please
seems
call
fairly
911.
clear he's just
Individuals can
talking
also report
about,
to the RCMP National
like, the
Security
Sikh
Information Network
community
by calling
and possibly,
1-800-420-5805.
like, members of the Indian
We
community.
recognize the concern and fear
'Cause
people
it
might
implies
be feeling
it-
when
'cause
seeing
by
this
saying-
news,
'cause
and we
when I
recognize that
first heard
South
it,
Asians are victims
when
of
he
these
says
activities.
South
we're
Asian
investigating.
community, it implies
We
to
want
me that he's talking
to assure all
about
Canadians
more
that
than
their
just
safety and
that.
security
Because
is
if
at the
he,
forefront
if
of
he
everything
was
we do,
only talking
and we
about
urge the
that, I would
public
assume
and
he
South
would
Asian
just
community
say
to remain
that.
calm and give law enforcement.
Yeah,
Canadian
no, I
officials
know
time to
that.
continue
That's.
discussion. While the RCMP does not generally
I was like messaging with him, and like he wasn't responding, because I was gonna try and get comment from him, and then he like popped up on the thing, and it was a very good clarification, because I that's why the implication was to me was that he was talking about more than just those two communities.
this in the past, there's a distinct investigation.
So these
The
are
Canadian
the
government
Q&A.
indicates that it has expelled some Indian diplomats and officials from our country.
Here, well, no, we'll just skip to
When it comes to your
Trudeau, because I remember this. This is more useful because the language in this press conference is intense.
And the protection
You'll
of
see
our
what I
citizens is paramount.
Whatever he
That's
says
why
before
when our
this
law
got
enforcement and
cut off.
intelligence officials began pursuing credible allegations that agents of the government of India were directly involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh
Amity, I don't know who you would
Nijjar,
report
on
that to.
Canadian soil, we responded. Nous avons partagé nos inquiétudes avec le gouvernement de l'Inde et lui avons demandé de travailler avec nous pour faire la lumière sur cet important enjeu. En même temps, les services de police et les organismes de sécurité ont utilisé tous leurs outils pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. Aujourd'hui, étant donné les nouvelles preuves présentées par la GRC, nous prenons des mesures additionnelles pour protéger les Canadiens. As the RCMP Commissioner stated earlier, they have clear and compelling evidence that agents of the Government of India have engaged in and continue to engage in activities that pose a significant threat to public safety. This includes clandestine information gathering techniques, coercive behavior targeting South Asian Canadians, and involvement in over a dozen threatening and violent acts, including murder. This is unacceptable. While attempts have been made by the RCMP and national security officials to work with the Government of India and Indian law enforcement counterparts on this matter, they have been repeatedly refused. This is why, this weekend, Canadian officials took an extraordinary step. They met with Indian officials to share RCMP evidence which concluded 6 agents of the Government of India are persons of interest in criminal activities. And despite repeated requests to the Government of India, it has decided not to cooperate. Étant donné le fait que le gouvernement de l'Inde refuse toujours de coopérer, ma collègue, la ministre Joly, n'avait qu'un seul choix. Aujourd'hui, elle a émis un avis d'expulsion pour ces 6 individus. Ils doivent quitter le Canada. Ils ne sont plus en mesure d'agir à titre de diplomate au Canada, ni d'entrer à nouveau au Canada, peu importe la raison. Let me be clear. The evidence brought to light by the RCMP cannot be ignored. It leads to one conclusion. It is necessary to disrupt the criminal activities that continue to pose a threat to public safety in Canada. That is why we acted.
To the man.
Because we will always, first and foremost, stand for the rights of Canadians to feel safe and secure in their own country. We will never tolerate the involvement of a foreign government threatening and killing Canadian citizens on Canadian soil, a deeply unacceptable violation of Canada's sovereignty and of
It is a much.
international law.
I'm not going to lie. It is a little
À nouveau,
much better like
demandons au
pace.
gouvernement de l'Inde de coopérer avec
If he
nous
sped
sur
up
cette
a
enquête,
little bit,
de mettre fin à son inaction
it's a little
et à
bit
sa
more lively.
rhétorique trompeuse, de
think we
reconnaître
cracked
la
it, folks.
crédibilité et la sévérité des preuves et des informations que nous
If
avons
Trudeau
partagées
can somehow
jusqu'à maintenant,
figure out a way to
et de
always talk
réitérer de
in
façon claire
1.25 speed.
que sa position sur les opérations extrajudiciaires à l'étranger sera désormais sans équivoque alignée avec le
He'll
droit
get his next
international.
majority. That's it.
Le Canada
We've
va toujours
solved it.
défendre l'État de droit et les principes fondamentaux sur lesquels s'appuient les sociétés libres et démocratiques. Nous incitons le gouvernement de l'Inde à en faire de même. I know the events of the past year and today's revelations have shaken many Canadians, particularly those in the Indo-Canadian and Sikh
It's bouncing
community.
along at a nice
Many
little
of you are
pace.
angry.
It's good.
Upset, frightened. I get that. This shouldn't happen. Canada and India have a long and storied history rooted in people-to-people ties, business, and trade. But we cannot abide by what we're seeing right now. Canada fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of India, and we expect the Indian government to do the same for Canada. As Prime Minister, it is my responsibility to provide reassurance to those who are feeling their safety has been compromised, but most importantly, it is my responsibility to take action and to never hesitate in doing what is necessary to protect Canadians. That is precisely what we are doing today. I'll now turn it over to Minister Leblanc to provide additional details on these developments. Dominic.
I mean, you wouldn't want India killing.
Thank you very much,
First Nations
Prime Minister.
member.
Bonjour à tous.
There,
Les
either.
graves conclusions présentées aujourd'hui par le commissaire de la GRC, police provinciale, rule of law. But I also hope that Canadians, particularly J'aimerais remercier tous ceux et celles qui ont joué, particularly Indo-Canadians and members of the Sikh community. This news will be understandably very upsetting. The actions that are alleged to have taken place on Canadian soil are indeed a grave violation of our sovereignty and of Canada's rule of law. But I also hope that Canadians find relief in knowing that our law enforcement and national security agencies are working to keep them safe and to hold to account those who seek to harm Canadians. I strongly encourage all Canadians, and in particular leaders in the South Asian and particularly the Sikh communities, to continue to work with law enforcement officials. For generations, people from every corner of the globe.
See that? It's because it's like they're going. I want to say more vague, but they're going less specific when they can be more specific. I don't get it.
Have come to Canada seeking a better life.
Maybe there is
precisely
some
because they felt that
spillover,
the
so
Canadian
maybe
government would duly fulfill
too
one
nitpicky.
of our most fundamental duties to keep them safe. And our law enforcement agencies work every day to uphold that promise. And I once again want to thank the RCMP and their law enforcement partners for their important work in this matter. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à ma collègue, la ministre des Affaires étrangères, qui pourra vous en dire plus sur les actions que le Canada a prises en réponse à ces conclusions. Alors, Mélanie, à toi la parole. Pardon.
Merci, Dominique. So, as I've said from the beginning, a year ago, we have three clear priorities when it comes to these incidents targeting Canadian citizens. First, we will seek the truth, that the police force are allowed to carry out their work and hold those responsible to account. Second, of course, to protect Canadian safety. And thirdly, to defend Canada's sovereignty.
Well, then,
Based on
maybe
information
he's doing his
provided
job, Emily.
to
You ever
Global
think
Affairs
about that?
Canada by the RCMP, we formally
that
requested
means
that
it's
India
working.
waive diplomatic immunity for 6 individuals based here in Canada and for India to cooperate in the investigation. This was done so that these individuals could be questioned in relation to the ongoing RCMP investigation into a number of violent incidents targeting members of the South Asian community, particularly the Sikh community, in many cities across the country. And you heard the Minister of Public Safety, my dear colleague and friend Dom LeBlanc, mentioning different cities across the country. Regrettably, as India did not agree,
Testing.
and given
1, 2,
the
3.
ongoing public safety concerns for Canadians, Canada served notices of expulsions to 6 diplomats and consular officials early this morning. Subsequent to those notices, India announced it would withdraw its officials. To be clear, we're not seeking diplomatic confrontation with
sick,
India,
not seek.
but we will not sit quietly as
But
agents
I
of any
shouldn't
country
talk,
are
'cause I
linked to
constantly
efforts to
make that
threaten,
mistake.
harass, or even kill Canadians, period. Canada is guided by the rule of law. We follow the Vienna Convention at all times, and we expect, of course, India to do the same as well. We will always continue to ask for India's cooperation to the investigation. I did so formally again by being in contact with the Foreign Minister of India, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, earlier today. And I've been also in contact with all my counterparts from the Five Eyes, so Foreign Minister Lamy from the UK, Secretary of State Blinken from the
David
US,
Lammy.
Penny Wong, also the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Australia, and Winston Peters, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs of New Zealand.
Trudeau also, I think, was meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, or maybe having a phone call.
Comme je l'ai dit depuis le début, nous avons 3 priorités claires en ce qui concerne les incidents visant les citoyens canadiens. Le premier, la recherche de la vérité, afin que les forces de l'ordre soient en mesure d'accomplir leur travail et de s'être interrogés tôt ce matin. Bien entendu, on va continuer le ministre britannique.
De nos conseillers nous entendent à ce moment-là.
La presse parlait d'extorsion.
Monumental. Attaquer les Canadiens. Empêcher. Fallait qu'on made a.
Oh wait, this is it. This is a goddamn quote.
I think it is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violent acts. It is absolutely unacceptable for any country, any democracy that upholds the rule of law.
Like,
that is why we have taken such significant measures, why the RCMP chose to come out today.
That is, like, just out of context, it's just a member of one G7 country, the leader of one G7 country speaking about the government of another G7 country like that is nuts.
And disrupt the pattern of Indian diplomats collecting.
Oh, just wait, Nathaniel. Were you watching Power and Politics?
Questionable and illegal means.
I got one hell of an interview I'm waiting
on
to throw
Canadian
on.
citizens that were then fed to criminal organizations that would then take violent actions from extortion to murder against Canadians. No country, particularly not a democracy that upholds the rule of law,
former
can accept this
Premier
fundamental
of
violation
BC
of its sovereignty.
had a lot of things to say.
Canada fully accepts and respects the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We expect India to do the same. In this case, they did not.
Next question.
Donna McJones, Toronto Star. Sir, given the magnitude of the diplomatic disruption that's happened now, I wonder if you can give us some clarity, because while I think I'm trying to read into what you're saying, that these 6 diplomats were sharing information with others. Are those others, the criminal organizations, the so-called agents of India, or are you saying the actual diplomats and consular officials were actively involved in the events? And one other clarity, if you could provide in terms of the time frame you're talking about. Is it over the last 4 weeks? Is it since the last 2 years? Just some clarity on those 2 things.
As the RCMP Commissioner pointed out this morning, these are ongoing investigations that are already before the courts in some situations and will end up in trials in the coming months in other situations.
Dieter, did you read the little graph below the embed? Because I'm pretty sure Iveson, like, recognizes in there that it's the same allegation the Indian government is making. Or maybe not. I mean, I don't know if they're parroting the disinfo, but it's just funny that it's like almost the same wording. And I don't understand what, like, K Bono, how does that benefit Trudeau? How does doing this now? And because that also explained to me how, like, are you saying he was like, he called up the RCMP and was like, you need to do this now, do it. I need a smoke bomb for my foreign interference inquiry testimony that most Canadians are going to be paying attention to anyways. Oh, well, I don't know.
What the RCMP can share,
a bit of a reach. I think that's
the
just
details
lazy.
of this are extremely limited. As those trials
I think it's more to do with
much
a lot
more
of people just
will be known.
wanting to have their
the decision
priors
to inform
confirmed.
Canadians right now by the RCMP
Hello, Harshal. How are you?
is aimed at keeping Canadians safe.
Yeah, we
at
got a
disrupting
YouTube
this
chatter.
pattern of behavior
Hell yeah.
that these Indian diplomats have been involved in, and ensuring that Canadians can feel safer, knowing that the RCMP is extremely active in these investigations and in following up on these criminal activities.
Yes, there's
So again,
6 diplomatic
around
officials
the diplomatic
in total,
sort of
including the
explosion that we've
ambassador.
seen in your relationships, your government's reached out to the Five Eyes allies. What pledge of support have you gotten from each of those? Are they backing you up in these claims? And what repercussions do you expect?
Well, first of all, let's highlight that none of us want to be in this situation. This is not a choice that Canada made to create a chill in Canada-India relations. India is an important democracy, is a country with which we have deep historical people-to-people business ties at a time where the instability around geopolitics mean democracies have to stick together. That is why when we started to understand through intelligence agencies that India
The government of Canada has
was
done
possibly, if not probably, behind Nijar's killing, the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil last summer. Our first choice, our first actions were to reach out, yes, to our Five Eyes partners, but also to the government of India.
Stab in the dark.
To say, we know this has happened. Work with us.
It's probably because we're talking about the
to
India
fix
allegations.
this. We don't want to be having this fight, but obviously the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil is not something that we can ignore as a country. So
Canada,
every step of the way,
because I would
we
love
have
to see, or
apprised
actually,
India
because I was going to say, I'd love
of
to
what we
hear
know.
how this is going off.
I've
in,
spoken
like,
directly with
Indian
Prime
media?
Minister Modi.
Because
We
there
have
are
engaged with intelligence
like the
counterparts.
YouTube streams,
and
but,
unfortunately, every step of the way, both after I made the statement in the House of Commons last September
I'm an ignorant Westerner.
and till now, the response
so how
of the
is-
Indian
how
government
are
has
things
been
going
to
off in the
deny,
news there?
to obfuscate, to attack me personally and the integrity of the government of Canada and its officials and its police agencies.
Or at least what's sort of been the, I guess,
And we
general
have
response.
simply said, we're going to allow our agencies to do the work. particularly to move from intelligence collection from agencies to police investigations that result in arrests, trials, and consequences within a rigorous and robust and independent judicial system. That has been our approach every step of the way. And indeed,
he's had a rough
over this past week, when the
Thanksgiving
RCMP reached out
and probably
to its
also jet
law
lag.
enforcement counterparts in India, there was a path where we could have worked together to ensure accountability and changes and steps that would have resulted in keeping Canadians safe, because that is our top priority. India, the Indian government, rejected those advances, rejected our attempts to find some way through this. And that brought us to this point of having to disrupt the chain of operations that go from Indian diplomats here in Canada to criminal organizations to direct violent impacts on Canadians right across this country.
Next question.
I don't think so. I must have missed that.
From your allies when you reached out and you didn't answer.
La situation dans laquelle on se retrouve est extrêmement indésirable. Non seulement on ne voudrait pas que des Canadiens soient en train d'être soumis à la violence dans leur communauté, chez eux, mais aussi on ne veut pas avoir ces tensions dans les relations avec l'Inde. C'est pour ça que l'année passée, comme dans la dernière semaine, nous avons approché le gouvernement de l'Inde par nos agences de sécurité, par nos diplomates, par nos agences policières, pour chercher une façon de résoudre ce différend profond pour protéger les Canadiens, pour créer une situation de redevabilité, de conséquences, mais pas pour venir détruire les bonnes relations, les relations entre l'Inde et le Canada. Malheureusement, l'Inde n'a pas choisi de travailler avec nous, a choisi de nier et de repousser et de faire des attaques personnelles contre ce gouvernement et mettant en question l'intégrité de nos agences et de nos institutions. Et nous avons dû répondre pour protéger les Canadiens. Par rapport à nos alliés, ça fait depuis les débuts de l'année passée qu'on a partagé toutes les informations qu'on avait avec nos alliés, particulièrement avec les Five Eyes. On sait que les Américains sont en train de vivre une situation parallèle avec un attentat d'homicide chez eux. Et nous allons continuer de travailler avec eux. From the beginning, as of last summer, we've worked closely with our Five Eyes partners, particularly with the United States, where they have gone through similar pattern of behavior from India in regards to an attempted extrajudicial killing. And we will continue to work with our allies as we stand up together for the rule of law.
Next question.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Maxime.
I mean, but why hasn't that been alleged by the Indian government? Why has none of that evidence been provided? And also, is that like, that's one of the weird things is a lot of the stuff you've heard has almost been like a tacit, like, well, we didn't do it, but if we did, it'd be justified.
Radio-Canada. Il y a une fronde qui s'organise au sein de votre parti pour vous évincer du leadership.
Soit unis sur l'enjeu. Indeed,
because it's like it's been a year since he was killed, and that's literally the first I've heard of that.
That any government, that any concern, and the safe pass du Canada et la sécurité de tous les Canadiens.
English, please.
I had many conversations with members of my team and caucus members over the past number of days, and all those conversations were focused on the well-being and the safety of Canadians faced with these significant security concerns and allegations. The safety of Canadians is the number one thing that any government, that any parliamentarians should be preoccupied with, and that is exactly what we're focused on. There will be time to talk about internal party intrigue at another moment, but right now,
when I was listening to this earlier today and they asked that, I was like, read the room. Though that like I could feel the conspiracy percolating, that's why this is happening, to distract, which again is also just as ludicrous. But
government, and indeed all parliamentarians, should be focused on standing up for Canada's sovereignty, standing against interference, and looking to be there to support Canadians in this difficult moment.
Donc, malgré la grogne, comptez-vous toujours être à la tête de votre parti aux prochaines élections?
Oui. Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Merci tout le monde.
The ministers will remain to take additional questions.
No.
Minister of Long-Term.
The only there's only a couple of conspiracies I want to feed, and like one of them is actually no, I don't want to do that. But some like I do kind of just like looking at the maps the flat earthers make, because it's like in the same way that like when you open up a fantasy novel and there's a map in it and you're like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff. Because some of them, it's some like, if they put their talents towards some like just some substantial fantasy writing, there's some good world building in there. Like it's cool. There's a new one. It's called like the Super Earth, where it's almost like I think they've gotten to a point where there's the ice wall. Yeah, like everything is within the ice wall, but it's not a wall. It's just a melted little circle because there's a sun over top of it, and there's a giant, like, I don't know if it's a giant larger globe or just a big larger flatter plane, and there's smaller other little like melted spots that have other different flat earths there. Like it's so imaginative. And it's like if this wasn't like, I mean, I wish there was a way they could express that creativity towards something a little bit more like beneficial to society than trying to tell people that the earth is flat. Is Canada having an election this year? Not 2024. I'd see now. I don't goddamn know. It could, maybe. I mean, timeline wise, I guess we could still probably fit one in depending on when they called it. But I would expect the next election is probably not going to be till. I mean, again, I'm always worried about even making these sort of predictions. But if I was going to put a very small amount of money down, I would tend towards, barring events, dear boy. But I think the Liberals would want to have it later rather than sooner. Unless something bad happens and they screw up real big, or I don't know, anything could happen. But I don't know. No, that would like, don't even put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. I'm not even reading that comment because I don't want to speak that evil into the world.
Can you
the country would tear itself apart.
Outline? We heard from the RCMP that there's a number of homicides that have been involved. Can you tell us the number of homicides that the Canadian government believes agents of the Indian government have been involved with?
So again, I wouldn't want to exceed the words of Commissioner Duhem this morning. I read very carefully his statement. He outlines a number of serious criminal activities in which they believe they have evidence of these Indian government agents participating. He talked about homicides and extortion. But these are also ongoing investigations. The Prime Minister just said it. I understand the interest in this matter, but I think the most important thing I can do as Minister of Public Safety is support the RCMP in continuing to investigate these serious crimes and hopefully bring them to Crown prosecutors who lay charges, and hopefully present them in the appropriate court to get convictions. So speculating on how many and what's a homicide and what's not, I don't want to speak for the RCMP, particularly when they are seized with ongoing criminal investigations. I think that's very, very important.
Minister Jolie, in the future, since there's been the number of expulsions today, is the Canadian government willing to accept additional diplomats coming from India in the future? And will there be any other reviews into people who could potentially be brought in here to make sure that they are safe and secure?
Well, thanks for the question, because I said it in my remarks. We don't want diplomatic confrontation with India. We know that there are thousands of Canadians that go to India every year. We have lots of people from India coming to Canada as well. So we know that there are deep people-to-people ties and want to make sure that these are still possible. And so in that sense, we are asking India to cooperate in the investigation, period. And they have a way of doing it. They're doing it with the U.S. They can do it with us as well.
I get the sense that they didn't want this to
with
happen.
the Five Eyes.
We have a
I
parliamentary
think what is
system
really
too, and
important
my
to
personal
understand
experience.
is that there's a difference between the U.S.
Coalition
investigation and
governments
ours,
suck.
in the
Hope you
sense
guys
that
don't
first
suffer
and
the same
foremost,
fate.
a Canadian died here in Canada.
It wasn't
so
a
there's
coalition,
an
but
investigation happening about a murder case. That's the first difference.
You got to tell your country's diplomats that the supply and confidence agreement no longer exists. So there's no longer an alliance between the NDP and Liberals. Just to give you that news, and it wasn't technically a coalition.
Difference is I
don't know. It does feel like they're trying to keep a lot of this hush hush because it is India. Like you don't want to have these problems with India, especially not in public. As they keep saying, India was the bulwark to China in this sort of Indo-Pacific strategy.
Sitting diplomats that were involved in violent incidents. And so that's really important to remember. And that's why we took the steps we took. And thirdly, the violence actually increased following the allegations a year ago. And so that's why it was important for the RCMP to take the steps that they took. Now, the similarity between the US and the Canadian case is also the fact that in both cases, it is difficult to get the cooperation from the government of India, notwithstanding the processes that are in place with the Americans.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Ministers. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Ms. Jolie, last week at the Foreign Interference Inquiry, you were asked specifically about the killing of Rapudaman Singh Malik. The inquiry asked you if Mr. Malik if his murder was linked to India. His murder was 2 years ago in 2022. You didn't answer that question. I'm wondering if you can now clarify whether, given that the government's talking about multiple homicides, this homicide is also connected to Indian agent involvement.
So, Marika, I couldn't answer because I'm not the Minister of Public Safety, nor, the head of the commission.
That's not cool. Because I won't answer it either.
No, but the reality is that's a question you should be asking the RCMP. But what I said, though, in front of the the public inquiry on foreign interference, is that there were clear preoccupations regarding the fact that there was agents of the Indian government that were involved in violence here against Canadians. And that's why I stand by my word.
Okay, and Mr. LeBlanc, do you want to add more to that?
Trudeau Senior's track record.
Full points for trying, Marika.
I honestly
you're saying
don't
homicides, but there's no other details.
So I'm adamant that we should stick to the four corners of the RCMP statement that they made today. That statement would have obviously been worked on with prosecutors and others who are seized with actual cases before the courts and maybe preparing other charges. So I just think it's so important to let the RCMP do the terrific work they do and hopefully lead to further charges and other convictions. I think speculating on who may or may not be in what category in that statement. If the RCMP didn't give that information, it's for a very specific reason, so I don't think it's helpful if I would add to it today.
Okay.
Yeah, I told you he could answer.
I didn't answer it either, but...
Hopefully you can answer this question. Mr. Jolie, the NDP are calling for more severe action. You've expelled diplomats, but they're saying sanctions are warranted given the severity of the allegations leveled today. Is the federal government considering sanctions against India? And if it's not sanctions, what other steps are you considering taking?
So today was a really important step. When you look at what is available in our toolbox, expulsing diplomats is one of the highest level, the highest and the toughest measure that a country can take under the Vienna Convention.
Awkward.
For the rest, we'll continue to push India to make sure that they cooperate. We'll continue to engage with our Five Eyes partners. We'll continue to engage with also all our G7 partners, and everything is on the table.
Next question.
Hi, Ministers. Tom Perry with CBC. Minister LeBlanc, can I ask you, has this operation disrupted this plot, or whatever you want to call it, or should sick Canadians still be worried? Are they still in danger, some of them?
So, Tom, I'm happy to answer the question, but Melanie got a chance to answer Tonda's earlier question, so I'll do it too and then come to your question, Tonda. Tonda, I spoke this morning, or this afternoon rather, with the United States Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Discussed with him what the RCMP were doing in Ottawa today.
50
he and
years
I discussed the importance of the FBI and the RCMP continuing to share information as these various criminal cases continue. There's a great deal of information shared between Five Eyes partners. As Melanie and the Prime Minister said, the U.S., because of the shared border, is a critical piece of that effort.
I don't know
and
if
I
it's
also
really
was
fair
in contact with the
to
Homeland
continue
Security
tarring
Secretary
them with the
Alejandro
same
Mayorkas.
brush.
So
Just
the
'cause
work
they-
with Five Eyes and the British Home Secretary Yvette Cooper,
Both
but
groups
the work with
believe in
Five
an
Eyes countries
independent
really is to ensure that the police are sharing information so that Canadian police can investigate crimes in Canada, but sometimes foreign police have interesting and helpful evidence in that work. So in that sense, there's a very, very active ongoing cooperation and has been from the beginning. Tom, you asked a very, I think, important question. The RCMP took the extraordinary step of calling a news conference on Thanksgiving Monday to publicly disclose evidence that they've collected over a number of months in a series of criminal investigations spanning many, many different parts of the country. That's unusual. Usually we learn about these things when a prosecutor goes to court and lays a charge. An RCMP officer swears an information, which then becomes public and becomes the basis of a criminal charge. So the extraordinary step that they took today...
that seems to be one of the major sticking points, is a lot of the stuff that India seems to be pointing to isn't technically illegal in Canada. None of it rises to the level of, like, criminal activity. The Indian government may really, really, really not like it, but that's two different things.
In their independent judgment, was because they believe it was important for the safety of Canadians to disrupt and dismantle what was increasingly an active and organized criminal network across the country. So my colleague's decision, the Foreign Affairs Minister's decision to
want an independent
expulse
state?
6 particular individuals
'Cause
working
that's different from
for the
saying that
Indian
there's
government,
still, like,
I think sends an
terrorists.
important step in terms of disrupting that ongoing criminal activity. And I would think that the RCMP will continue to do the work they're doing in ongoing criminal investigations. And I hope and think that we'll see more charges and more arrests. But this was their decision to, in the interest of public
You're on a
safety,
roll
try and
tonight.
disrupt and dismantle an organized criminal enterprise that was representing, in their view, a threat to the public safety of Canadians.
And Minister Joly, could I ask you, why do you think India felt this sense of impunity? Why do you think the Indian government thought they could get away with this?
Way.
Tom, that's a question you need to ask them. So,
that's
but what I know
amazing.
is transnational repression, targeting dissidents is something that we see more and more in different
goddamn
democracies
funny.
by states. And for us, it is a question of principle. Today is about Canadian safety. This is about Canada, and we need to send a strong message. And I hope also that we're sending a strong message to other Western democracies that are dealing with this, because this is not only happening in Canada. And so that's why I think it is important that Canadians are aware. It is important that India gets the message.
Last question.
Incredible
Minister
things are
LeBlanc,
happening on
I hear what you're saying about not wanting to speak out of
X.com, the
turn with ongoing
everything site.
investigations happening, but neither the government nor the RCMP are saying how many Canadians are dead as a result of the actions of the Indian government.
It's nuts. Not just shilling, but, like, giving up their Thanksgiving Monday to do that whole press conference. Sorry if I'm screaming. It keeps saying I'm going into the red. I'm trying not to yell too much. When was the Indira Gandhi assassination? Because that was, like... Again. Can you give me anything that happened less than half a century ago? But how? Is he doing anything illegal? Other than having a political perspective that the Indian government doesn't like. Because a lot of it just sort of starts to sound like the way the Chinese government sounds like Uyghur separatists. Right, where was I?
Canada expelled
Law
6
went on
Indian
power
diplomats after the
politics, so watch
RCMP
this.
said it found evidence of serious criminal activity. These developments come after a high-level meeting between Canadian and Indian officials in Singapore over the weekend. David Morrison, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Nathalie Drouin, the National Security Advisor, traveled to Singapore to meet with Ajit Doval, India's National Security Advisor. They were joined by a senior official from the RCMP who walked them through the evidence the National Police Force had collected. That included intercepted Indian communications and other information that the RCMP has found since the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Canada believes Indian diplomats were collecting evidence on Sikh activists and sending those details back to the government. And those activists were later threatened or attacked, or in the case of Nijjar, murdered. A Canadian official says Doval did admit that Indian diplomats collected information, but denied it led to violence and denied any role in violent acts in Canada. India also refused to waive diplomatic immunity and allow police to interview the diplomats. So just before 9 a.m. today, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly delivered the order expelling India's High Commissioner and 5 other diplomats from the country. India responded by expelling 6 Canadian diplomats, including Acting High Commissioner Stuart Wheeler.
The government of Canada has done what India has long been asking for. Canada has
This is
provided
just after he'd been expelled as well.
irrefutable evidence of ties between agents of the government of India and a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
On Canadian
now
soil.
it is time for India to live up to what it said it would do
Any
and
evidence
look into
that is
those
connected
allegations.
to Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and is that
It is in
somehow
the
a
interest of both
justification
our
for his
countries
killing?
and the peoples of our countries. To get to the bottom of this, Canada stands ready to cooperate with India.
Dominic LeBlanc is the Minister of Public Safety, and he joins me in the studio now. Minister, thanks for coming in on a pretty extraordinary day. I want to start with the RCMP statement because they sort of gave us the scope and breadth of what we're dealing with here, where they called this an extraordinary situation, compelling them to go public, because we don't see news conferences like this very often. But they felt the need to do it due to the significant threat to public safety in our country. How would you describe this threat to public safety in our country right now?
I think you're right, David, to say that it was an extraordinary step. The RCMP kept me informed at a high level of
What do you mean, Andy?
some of this investigative work, but
You're saying you don't think
they
X is
concluded
a
in their own
reliable
judgment
source
that it was important to disrupt and dismantle what was increasingly a violent, organized criminal effort, including the participation of 6 individuals who work for the Indian government, diplomats who are in Canada. It is unusual, as you say, that the RCMP stand up and talk about evidence they've collected over many, many months in a number of different investigations, I would assume. Normally, we learn about these things when criminal charges are laid and a suspect is arrested and then there's a court process. But they thought that it was important to disrupt and dismantle this increasingly aggressive and concerning criminal
that's the first
activity
I'm hearing about
in many parts of the country. It wasn't just
Singh's
1 or 2
brother
cities. I heard about it from mayors in different communities in Western Canada and Ontario, heard increasingly about it in Quebec. So the RCMP thought this was an important step to disrupt and dismantle this activity. The Minister of Foreign Affairs expelled these 6 diplomats. But David, they're also continuing actively a number of criminal investigations with police partners in almost a dozen Canadian cities looking into specific criminal activities. My hope is that those investigations lead also to criminal charges and ultimately convictions.
A dozen Canadian cities. There are a lot of numbers flying around today, and I appreciate there is a lack of specificity required to protect the integrity of the investigations. But when Commissioner Duhem and his deputy are talking about 8 people have been arrested for murder, 22 have been arrested for extortion, and you say a dozen Canadian cities, are these all activities and incidents that tie directly back to the government of India and the diplomats they had in Canada?
Yeah, so I'm not involved in the intricacies of ongoing active police operations. The RCMP shared with me a list of municipal police forces that they have partnered with as part of these different investigations. And I was surprised the extent to which so many Canadian communities were working with the RCMP in these investigations. So I think that Commissioner shared what information he can share. I have a lot of faith in the work that Commissioner Duhem does, the Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn, who, as you noted, was with other officials in Singapore. These are very experienced, very senior police officers who have taken a lot of time with the help of dozens and dozens of colleagues in the RCMP, and as I said, partners in other police forces and federal intelligence agencies. So I've had a privileged chance to see this remarkable work being done.
For a while,
and
so
I think Canadians, and particularly Sikh Canadians, who understandably and have been sharing with us and publicly their concerns for the safety of their community, they need to know the RCMP are very, very engaged with other police partners, and they should have a lot of confidence that they'll continue to do the work necessary to bring before justice people perpetrating these crimes.
You say disrupt and dismantle. We've seen these arrests, but the big event today was the expulsion of the 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner to Canada. Is that dismantling a criminal organization, in your view, kicking out 6 Indian government officials?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for the commissioner. His news conference, he shared the details that he and the prosecutors and lawyers that would advise him in terms of what's appropriate to share publicly. He shared what he was able to share. But if 6 Indian diplomats were expelled as a result of the RCMP evidence collected in this investigation, I think that's
the problem now is.
But it isn't the end of the story, David. This is what
an
in the
active
RCMP
investigation, so we'll never
independent
be able to see
judgment
that.
was an important
Canada has
step
expelled.
to disrupt and dismantle, to make it harder for this criminal organization to continue to perpetrate these increasingly violent acts. But they'll continue to do the normal police work that they do with partners across the country, and bring before the criminal justice system those that decide to perpetrate criminal acts in Canada.
Canada has expelled.
And I spoke today, for example, with the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, the Homeland Security Secretary in the United States, Alejandro Mayorkas, precisely to share with them the information that the RCMP were bringing out publicly today, but to urge them to continue to work with us and to share information the FBI might have, other American intelligence agencies. There has been a very, very extensive collaboration to date. They said that to me. They have thanked us in some cases for information that we've shared with them. But it's very important, I think, particularly Five Eyes countries, the UK, the US, for example, that this work be seamless. So I'm very encouraged that that'll be the case.
I was struck by the language you're using in this interview, but in particular the language that the Prime Minister used earlier. When we talk about stories like this, in my job, we have to use alleged, claim, allegations. There's none of that coming from the government of Canada. You're absolutely convinced, it sounds to me, from what the Prime Minister was saying, that the Indian government is clearly involved with this. Otherwise, you're not kicking out these 6 diplomats.
Well, I was convinced by the evidence that the RCMP collected as part of an ongoing and extensive criminal investigation over many months. The RCMP commissioner is Canada's most senior police officer. He leads an organization of 20,000 plus police officers and 10,000 civilians. He's not going to stand at a news conference on Thanksgiving Monday at 11:30 and talk publicly about evidence if he's not absolutely convinced that this evidence is reliable and credible. And when the government is given that evidence, the Foreign Affairs Minister took, I think, the only decision that she could, and she expelled these diplomats.
The other thing that Commissioner Duhem says today, and this is from the written statement, that they have found links tying agents of the government of India to homicides, plural. There's an S there. We know of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. I know you were asked for a specific number, and I appreciate you can't do that, but that's not a typo, right? We're talking about more than one killing?
Again, I don't type out the RCMP statements myself.
You would know, would you not, if it's more than one, based on us getting to this point?
I know what I read in the statement, and as I said, I know that these statements are vetted in great detail, precisely not to
Shaft, but then
prejudice
he gets asked
ongoing
this
criminal
question, and it's
investigations.
like,
The last thing that they would want to do is
I
say
can't
something
even
publicly that
repeat
later
the
becomes
things that the
an
RCMP
excuse
has already
for a
said publicly.
defense attorney or for a
like, what are
judge
you
to
talking
decide
about?
that for whatever reason the trial is going to be stayed, the charges will be stayed, the trial will be aborted. So all of this stuff was very much in the hands of the RCMP, and as I say, I have faith that they used the best language they could. And their statement speaks for itself.
But it is quite an alarming thing for Canadians to hear. I think you would agree, right? That homicides, violent acts, plural, extortions. We have seen all kinds of stories in local news about what's happening in South Asian communities, Edmonton, you know, all around Toronto, the lower mainland of British Columbia. Narendra Modi nominally leads a democracy and is invited to groups like the G7 to meet with the Western countries on how to deal with the problems of the day. But then we look at something like this. I mean, is India an ally as long as Narendra Modi and his government are in charge and operations like this are happening overseas?
That's a good question that the Indian government and Prime Minister Modi could answer.
How do you view them, though?
Well, I view it as extremely unfortunate that at multiple entreaties they have refused to participate with Canadian law enforcement and diplomatic officials in an investigation where senior RCMP officers and people as senior as the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, David Morrison, or Nathalie Drouin, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, are sharing with their counterparts details of evidence collected by Canada's National Police Force, that the Indian government would refuse to acknowledge the concern that in a rule of law country like Canada that values its territorial integrity, the sovereignty of Canada. We respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We wish they would do the same. And in circumstances where they couldn't, it's too bad that they won't participate with Canadian law enforcement officials in stopping this increasingly violent criminal, organized criminal network, and ensure that all of the investigative weight is brought to bear to hold those before the justice system that have perpetrated these acts.
Can you help us understand what it was about this point in the investigation and in the examination of these issues that led the RCMP to go to the Indian government and confront them with the information and seek the ability to interview the diplomats? Is it because of the public safety concerns? Is that what drove the timing here, or were they at a point in their investigation that they need the cooperation of India to move to the next step? Because
no, that's what I mean. Like, that's the impression I got is the government very much does not want to be in the position it is in right now, but it feels like they feel like their hand was forced because the Indian government went so public with it this morning. Because apparently they were discussing lifting diplomatic immunity to allow for these officials to be interviewed by the RCMP, and the Indian government apparently declined that, and that's why they sort of they went forward with this. Or I'm not sure of the timeline. But it does not, like, that's one of the things. It does not feel like they, like, with most things. Or no, I shouldn't say with most things. That's unfair. But every once in a while, shall we say, the government, the Liberal government, will do something, and it seems like this really bold, just incredible action that they've taken, and it turns out that they did it because their hand was forced. And it kind of feels like that's what's happening here. I could be wrong. But I don't think this is some grand design by the Liberal government to, like, distract from the Yeah, let's allege a giant foreign interference and transnational repression plot to distract from my testimony on foreign interference and transnational repression. Great plan, guys.
said on the show in May around the Niger investigation that they weren't getting the help they needed. So has it just gotten to that point, or was it driven by public safety, as far as you know?
Yeah, and again, I want to be careful not to speak for the RCMP, because these are independent operational decisions that they appropriately make.
Also kind of conspiratorial, but more in the realm of
but I
a possibility.
Took the deputy commissioner Mark Flynn,
but I
and
think
the
it's
commissioners.
I think it's literally just when I think the thing happened on the weekend, and this is the Indian government's reaction to that. I don't know if it's like anyone had I think this is all just people sort of responding. I don't think anyone's thinking a cup moves ahead is the impression. This doesn't feel like anyone's playing 3D chess right now.
Words very seriously when they said they had a growing concern around public safety, and they thought that the moment had arrived to take this
more feels like they're
extraordinary
playing
step
chicken with each
to
other.
disrupt, dismantle this criminal enterprise. That was their decision. I have a lot of faith that they made that judgment at the right moment for the right reasons. But I also have a lot of faith that their ongoing criminal work with other partner police agencies hopefully will bring other people before the courts facing criminal charges, because that ultimately is the price that people who perpetrate criminal acts in Canada should face. They should be before a competent criminal court to face those charges.
So just as a final point, I mean, if public safety is driving this, do you think these actions today lower the risk of public safety? Because there's going to be a lot of people out there who go to Gurdwaras in particular who are going to be they've been alarmed by this for a long time, but maybe especially alarmed that this could escalate. So do you think this has diffused that threat level to some degree? Do you need to take steps in conjunction with partners at provincial and municipal levels to ensure, I don't know, a greater level of protection for these communities?
So we're always concerned about that, David. We talk to members of the Sikh community. I do all the time. I spoke to colleagues in our caucus representing Sikh communities earlier today. So this is a constant concern for us.
But Harshal, specifically in this instance today, Trudeau is not the one to take this all public. It was the Indian government that went public with all this morning at 6 a.m. Well, 6 a.m. our time. Trudeau's going public with all this after the Indian government went public.
Traveling to Yellowknife on Wednesday morning to meet all of the provincial and territorial
Trust me, I know most of the parliamentary press
ministers
gallery.
With my colleague Arif Avarani.
That tweet hadn't gone out
I'm going to
this
be
morning.
Talking to our
if the Indian government hadn't made that statement this morning,
counterparts
none of us would have known this was
in
happening.
the RCMP's judgment, they thought that this would.
Well, he went public after the guy was killed. That he went public with the fact that a Canadian citizen was killed, and potentially there was evidence that the Indian government was involved. We can argue whether or not that was well advised or not, or even if you think you believe him when he says that. But today specifically, in this current episode, it was not Trudeau who went public with it. It was the Indian government that went public with it. Yes, that is another part where it's Fife was hot on the tail, and then Trudeau, he didn't just tweet it out, but he did just go into the House of Commons and make the statement, protected by parliamentary privilege, but that might have just been because they were rushed for time and they had to be absolutely sure that he wasn't going to get himself sued or something, or worse. So just have him say it in the House of Commons so he can at least have parliamentary privilege.
Disrupt and help dismantle this criminal enterprise. But
that's definitely an argument you can make, Nathaniel, and I don't think you'd be irrational if that was your argument, that actually it was the assassination itself that started this. But when we're talking about going public, I mean, even before the Trudeau made the announcement, when the killing happened, it was fairly high profile, and the Sikh community weren't listened to immediately, but immediately we're like, we know what happened here.
Continue to worry and continue to work to ensure that,
and they seem to have been vindicated
those
since.
in communities that are threatened, it's not only the Sikh community, but in this case they're predominantly targeted. We have programs that help them.
But it wasn't public.
With
No one knew
security,
about it until
infrastructure
that
investments
statement
at their
went out
places
this
of
morning.
worship, their community centers.
And in the
They can
statement,
hire
the Indian
private
government was saying that they
security
were
guards, and
withdrawing
the government
their
helps them
diplomats.
pay at particular events where
And
they
it was
have
only
a
later
concern.
that
So
we
we've been
realized,
doing
well,
that
actually,
work for
they
a
had
number
been
of
made
months
persona
with
non
all
grata
kinds of
previous to that.
communities, including the Sikh community. But the RCMP will be very, very vigilant over the next hours and days. And they have, as I said, an enormous partnership that is very, very strong with local police of jurisdiction in many of these cities. The mayor of Edmonton talks to me about the work that the Edmonton Police Service does. So that's just one example amongst many. In Peel region, there's a deep, deep connection also, the Ontario Provincial Police. So I'm very confident that that work's done, David, but you're right to highlight
there's a lot of
the
overlap.
concern that many people in those communities feel, but they should know that the Government of Canada and the RCMP in particular are very much at work.
Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, appreciate your time on a busy day.
Thank you, David. Have a great day.
Not every rectangle is a square, but all squares are rectangles, sort of thing. Or basically all the squares are. I don't even know. I'm not conflating. I'm just saying. Yeah, no, I told you this is a 2 double caffeine shot day. So before we go to the Power and Politics panel, I just want to set the scene. So this is sort of the flurry of statements that were released over the course of the day from leadership. First of which was from Global Affairs. After this was put out just around 2:40. I got this a couple minutes after it went live. So we'll say around 2:40, 2:35, 2:40 in that time window. So this basically everyone already knew this was happening, but this is when the official statement went out. But the statement from Jolie said the decision to expel these individuals was made with great consideration and only after the RCMP gathered ample, clear, and concrete evidence. Evidence which identified 6 individuals as persons of interest in the Niger case. So it's directly implicating the Indian ambassador in the Niger assassination. We continue to ask that the Indian government support the ongoing investigation in the Niger case, as it remains in both our countries' interest to get to the bottom of this. So that was Jolie's statement. The same thing. Then we had a flurry of conservative shadow critics, starting with the finance critic, Shazra Singh Halan, then the deputy leader, Tim Uppal, and then foreign affairs critic, Michael Chong, as well as, did I not tweet the other one? So yeah, they got both deputy leaders. I think I saw Melissa Lanceman has since tweeted as well. That was the further one. We got, so they all tweeted their conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre's statement onto their timelines. And this is his statement. The news and allegations today from the RCMP are extremely concerning and it must be taken very seriously. Any foreign interference from any country, including India, is unacceptable and must be stopped. Our government's first job is to keep our citizens safe from foreign threats. We expect the full criminal prosecution of anyone and everyone who has threatened, murdered, or otherwise harmed Canadian citizens. For 9 years, the Liberal government has failed to keep our people safe or to take national security and foreign interference seriously. Because of that, Canada has become a playground for these activities. So that was the leader of the opposition statement, which, oddly enough, was never tweeted by the actual leader. I think this was as of when was it? What time was this? When did I tweet this? God damn it. Where's, what the? So it's 7:01. So about 5 p.m. I think this is still the last tweet that was on his page. And it's always kind of interesting to note which statements he puts out himself and which ones he either farms out to critics or only goes to like a press gallery, like a press release. Yeah, Melissa Lantzman was the last one I saw sharing it. And also someone also pointed out that this is like this is an old photo. Who had it? Like, things that made me go, I don't know. Maybe they just have the one good holiday outfit that they like to wear all the time. And it's weird. They must have been really desperate to push something out onto their timeline for whatever reason. It's but it doesn't have his statement yet, and I just think it's very, very odd. So that was their Poilievre's statement, which he has still yet to share himself. This is Jagmeet Singh's statement. New Democrats are extremely worried about the information released by the RCMP commissioner today. Canadians, particularly the Sikh community in Canada, has been stalked by fear, threats, harassment, and violence, including extortion, violence, and electoral interference, all allegedly at the hands of Indian officials. Canada has long held credible evidence that the Narendra Modi government was involved in the murder of Canadian Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil, and the United States has already indicted multiple individuals for related crimes. Yet NDP had to fight just to have potential subversive activity by India included in the scope of the inquiry into foreign interference. Since September 2023, at least 13 people have been warned by the RCMP of grave threats against them. The safety of Canadians has not yet been assured. New Democrats' main priority is to ensure that all Canadians are safe in our country, free from extortion, violence, and electoral interference. In the interest of protecting Canadians in our country, I urge all leaders to get their security clearance and I urge all leaders to get the security clearance. That's very veiled, barely veiled shot at Poilievre there, and hold the Modi government accountable and refuse to look the other way. We support today's decision to expel India's diplomats, and we're calling on the government of Canada yet again to put diplomat sanctions against India in place, ban the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh Network, RSS, in Canada, and commit to pursuing the most severe consequences for anyone found to have participated in criminal activity on Canadian soil. Well, I mean, basically the first half of your hypothetical Harshal, that all happened. We dealt with that. We had a whole, there was a whole, speaking of Pierre Trudeau, it was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. Wait, but the Jagmeet's there. It wasn't a coalition. And who has the Indian government asked to have extradited to India? Because again, this is the first I'm hearing of it. Oh, you mean in the referring to Quebec, Nathaniel? I'm assuming. All right. FLQ, yeah. I don't know who. We'll have to look up who Igor Guzenko is. I'm not super well read on Cold War stuff. I mean, I know the goddamn cliff notes, but like, if you give me Igor Guzenko and you expect me to know who that is, you're mistaken, my friend. All right, I'm gonna use the little boy's room. I'm gonna let the Pulse panel babysit you for a quick second.
I have been told by the Public Safety Minister, Dom LeBlanc, that there is credible evidence that the government of India, through agents in Canada, has been involved in homicides, plural, extortions, plural, acts of violence against Canadians, acts of intimidation against Canadians, with an aim of advancing the interests of the government of India. This is obviously a very serious allegation, and I am certain that he would not be raising these issues. The RCMP would not be holding a press conference if this wasn't serious and credible information.
That was British Columbia Premier David Eby speaking this afternoon after learning of the new allegations against the Indian government. The RCMP says it has credible evidence linking agents of the Modi government to homicides and violent acts, and that compelled the RCMP today to reveal the new information to Canadians, calling it an escalating public safety threat. In response, Canada has expelled 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre issued a statement on this. Any foreign interference from any country, including India, is unacceptable and must be stopped. Our government's first job is to keep our citizens safe from foreign threats. For 9 years, the Liberal government has failed to keep our people safe or to take national security and foreign interference seriously. Because of that, Canada has become a playground for these activities. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh also issued a statement today. He said he was briefed today on these allegations. In the interest of protecting Canadians and our country, I urge all leaders to get their security clearance and hold the Modi government accountable and refuse to look the other way. Singh also called on the federal government to put diplomatic sanctions against India in place. All right, we're going to talk about all of this with our party insiders because there's a lot to talk about there and how it's playing out. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager, and Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Happy long weekend Monday. Thank you all for answering the bat signal and coming in today. Greg, let's start with you. I've never seen anything quite like this, which is what I said when the Prime Minister stood in Parliament last September and linked India to the murder. Now, as David Eby said, we have homicides, plural, extortions, plural, all going back to the Modi government.
It's horrendous, and I will tell you what reasonable partisans do when something happens. You take your party name out of it, and you say, okay, if this happened, if you just said party A, B, and C, in this case, country A or country B, what would your reaction be?
All right,
your reaction
I'm back.
should not be based on your relations or how they feel about your political opponent. And immediately, again, we're the political pulse panel, so I'm going to the politics. You know, the fact that you know, we know that a Canadian citizen was murdered. You pointed out in your last interview with Minister Dominic LeBlanc.
Oh, okay, never mind. Okay, I know this story.
So
now
that's concerning. I'll go back to the politics for a second. When we first started doing this panel,
I know this.
One of the first weeks we're on, maybe in the first weeks, Mel pointed out that when this issue first came up in the House, there were opposition parties that picked India over Canada. And we're not a country that wraps ourselves in the flag like the United States and makes a big deal about patriotism, but you should see Canada first. And I look at that last paragraph.
Happy
and
Canadian
the leader of the
Thanksgiving to you
opposition's
too.
Statement, which he did not issue, some MPs have, I guess, on his behalf. I guess stop the crime is just a slogan.
So I do know this story.
I mean, we're talking about homicides here.
See, I know Cliff Notes, but if you test me on names, places, and dates,
statement,
I'm failing.
much stronger
No way
than that. I'm having a hard time, and if you go back to look at last fall, the Conservative leader did continue to criticize the Canadian Prime Minister, saying you should be building a better relationship with Prime Minister Modi.
Well, thank you, Cali Kid.
I will point out
Have a good sleep.
Last
Hopefully
year,
you're not too tired in the morning.
Modi was looking like he was going to sail into another re-election with a majority. He no longer has that. What was predicted, his political strength in India didn't actually pan out, and he has now a coalition party. Well, so a lot of things have changed.
Yeah, he no longer has a majority ML. He no longer has a High Commissioner to Canada and 5 other diplomats because of the moves that were taken today. This is a pretty extraordinary thing for Canada to have done this and for the National Police Force to go public like this because of a concern about threats to public safety. There's been a lot of punditry in politics leading up to this point. How do the revelations of today kind of change all of that?
I don't know that, well, obviously it changes a lot, so maybe I shouldn't start there. But I think, what the minister was saying, and what we heard the Prime Minister say, the importance of reassuring community members and talking to community members. I think what we've seen, and we've talked about this on a few panels in the last.
The one thing you have to remember, no matter what the story is or what the update, it proves that Sam Cooper's reporting is bulletproof. That's what you have to remember about everything.
I guess a year and a half now, but basically saying to those community members who haven't been feeling safe or who have been feeling
Should we read the Iveson piece?
Are worried about
do I want to do that to myself?
From the Indian government. This to me sounds like a recognition of that, but also if you weren't paying attention to this, you maybe need to pay attention to it a little bit. So hearing the seriousness and the how heavy that was, I think just brings us back to, what we've been saying on this issue. This is the death of a Canadian on Canadian soil. It sounds like it may be more than one Canadian. And even for those who have been dealing with threats or who have been feeling unsafe in our country, that's just beyond,
that's why it would be
this
funny
is not
to
something
read
that you've seen.
if it's that bad.
That's something that we need to take absolutely seriously, and I think that's what we saw earlier today.
Fred, your thoughts on what we've seen so far today?
Well, I mean, do you mean with approval or without approval from the United States?
Statement was quite clear about, this needs to be taken seriously. And for him to point out where the government has been on this, on public safety issues, is fair comment and important to make out.
Oh, is Fred's mic on, gang? I'm not hearing it very well. I just want to double check that. So anyway, while we just check that, I'm just going to read the statement again. For 9 years, the Liberal government has failed to keep our people safe or to take national security and foreign interference seriously. Because of that, Canada has become a playground for these activities. Sorry, Fred, just pick up on that.
Look, we learned last week that a warrant from CSIS sat on the Minister of Public Safety, or Mr. Blair's desk, for 54 days. So it is fair comment to point out that there seems to be a real lapse in the government here. And look,
yes, without
approval.
Yeah, no, I mean,
out there today saying that this
at
is
least,
a politically motivated thing.
I don't know if I would say approval. Like, I don't know if they're like, yeah, go ahead, Canada. But it'd be surprising to me that this would happen without, one, the Americans at least being aware of it, and B, not actively trying to stop Canada from doing it. I think if America had wanted Canada not to do this, it wouldn't have. I don't know if that means that they wanted it to happen, but they at least probably didn't try to convince Canada not to do it.
I can tell you this Liberal.
I don't know. I don't think they want it to become a big story. I just don't think they have good reason to try and stop it from that happening.
They have failed to take national security and foreign interference seriously. This is a leader who Jagmeet Singh points out in his statement won't get his national security clearance and read a report about the government of India allegedly meddling in the leadership race that put him in Stornoway. Like, where's the moral high ground on that one?
Well, look, on his point on that is he doesn't believe he can comment fairly.
Did I not
on that
turn
once
his
he's read
mic
that
on?
report. It takes him out of it. Once
This
you
seems
agree to do
goddamn
that, there's certain things you
CBC
can't say anymore.
pro-liberal
So that's why he's not
bias,
saying that or
trying
doing
to
that.
silence the conservative
that does
voice.
not sound extremely responsible, you know, from somebody who wants to be a prime minister. He's worried about whether
he's leader of the opposition.
No,
It's
Fred,
not his job
takes
to make
away
the
his
decisions of government.
it takes away his ability to fire shots. What's more important here, Canada's sovereignty, or the leader of the opposition taking some shots at the prime minister, making this political in areas where it need not be? Because I think if you start to pull the thread a little bit on this,
to what end?
Especially around conservative leaderships, I don't have to look very far to see photos of then Conservative MP Patrick Brown and Prime Minister Stephen Harper with Modi. You know, I think if we just say, you know, a pox on all the politics, and why can't we be, and this is going to sound very Pollyanna, why can't we be Canadian first and protect ourselves? No one in Canada really took this seriously last year until the New York Times reported in November, because they were dealing with an assassination allegation or attempt in New York State.
Yeah, Nikhil Gupta is in jail right now. I've got the court documents here. Far more detail than we get in Canada, but that's the American system versus the Canadian system. But, you know, Fred, we have what is pretty clear now, a pattern of transnational repression and violence, allegations of it at least, like homicides in Canada, according to a premier and the commissioner. We've seen a foiled plot in the United States, other examples from the United Kingdom, from Australia. I have no idea what the domestic politics are there, but I don't know if they're blaming the government for this. It's just, this seems like an issue where you move past the partisanship. I don't know, Fred and then Mel on it.
Yeah, look, the front end of his statement was saying that, about how we have to take this serious and we have to do serious things about it. But again, it's fair comment to point out, again, the Minister Blair, 54 days, a warrant sat on his desk.
Well, not on his desk, with his chief of staff. With his chief of staff. Yeah.
In his office, wherever.
Absolutely. There's a
I mean, if you ask some liberals, amity,
No,
the CBC is already in the bag for polio.
It is, the evidence is mounted up.
Because they keep reporting on those damn pesky polls.
I wasn't trying to undermine your point there. Like, it was there for 54
How dare
days.
they report
Zita
on
Astrovac,
the fact
chief of
that
staff, was
people
aware
don't
of it
like
for some
Trudeau
reason,
very
never
much.
brought it to the minister. And Blair, there's no contradiction to this, that when it got to him, he signed it quickly. But that gap is damning, as you say, and it has not been filled with explanation, except, well, if CSIS thought it was so important, they should have told us. Well, they sent it to you in the first place. That means they think it's important.
Not putting that on the
Mel, your thoughts
screen
on the politics
shaft.
swirling around this? Because I've even seen some things now from national pundits saying, what's going on here? Why is Canada inflaming things with India? It's like, India is accused of dropping bodies in multiple countries. It's not
dropping
the other way around.
bodies.
If Canada did this, I would have had a very different conversation with Dominic LeBlanc.
Totally.
Just what do you make of where it's going?
Yeah, I mean, I respectfully disagree with Fred on this one. I think if you want to be prime minister, you have to be statesmanlike on these issues, and the fact that you're refusing to get security clearance, I don't know how you explain that to folks in this community who are super worried about this. And the other thing that I want to remind folks, when we were looking at foreign interference last year, last fall, and we were talking about India in particular, the Conservatives didn't want to add India to the inquiry in the first place. This was something that they had to push and
that's not what I didn't mean to do that one.
They had no interest in talking about this. So to now say, you
Why
know,
are they
we
so
need to take this
delayed now,
seriously and to
too?
use it as a football against the Prime Minister, I just don't. I think people deserve better, and that's not it.
What do you make of the language, Mel, that the Prime Minister used today, Dominic LeBlanc? There's no, we believe, it's alleged. They're very clear. India did this in their view. They believe it. And also the argument coming from the Prime Minister today that every step of the way, we tried to cooperate with them, and every step of the way they said no. Clearly sensitive to the allegations that somehow it's Canada poisoning the well with India.
Totally, and that's that, you know, that almost, and I get it, we're in politics, it's supposed to be partisan, but I think that's where that is, right? It's that folks already have distrust with this government, and, you know, for a lot of reasons that's fair. But on this issue that is super important, I appreciate why they're being careful with that, and they're really pointing that out. And again, the death of a Canadian on Canadian soil, like, that's it. That's all we have to say. And if you've got proof of that, it should end there.
Craig?
Yeah, I go back to the fact that you shouldn't qualify this on which country is doing it and how you feel about them or how they're helping you. Press Progress, about a month ago, had an article of a very well-known right-wing Indian commentator who's
The
very
parliamentary
considered to be very
system
close to
says
the
so.
Prime Minister, who was advocating support for the Canadian Conservative Party to help defeat Justin Trudeau.
Parliamentary system says
So
it's supposed to
I'm
be
not
partisan.
saying he's doing that in concert, but obviously, when an ally of Modi
The whole
is advocating
politics
for a certain
stops
political
at-
party, if I was that party, I would be bending over
borders is
backwards
bull
to
crap.
make sure you looked
I
cleaner
will
than
hydrate.
clean. And he had
my
the opportunity
White Claw.
today in that statement to be forceful. I like Mel. I don't understand why you don't have the security clearance, and I just think it was not a great moment for somebody who tells us daily.
This
that
is
he wants
true,
to be our
but
Prime Minister.
coalition
It's
building
interesting,
implies
we've
that
seen
there are
the leaks to the Indian media that
opposition
Trudeau is
parties.
making this up to try to vote bank, by getting support among Sikh Canadians. We saw that story that came out when they had the plane issues overseas about drug-sniffing dogs and cocaine on the Prime Minister's plane that Post Media ran the reports of, which is all just a lie and it's false. But here it is, Fred, that this is expanding now, right? There's an S on homicide. We knew about the Hardeep Singh Nijjar thing, and we saw in Jagmeet Singh's statement of making the reference to the national security clearance. Do you think this now becomes an issue for Mr. Poilievre if he's going to make a statement like this? I know it is an issue, but do you think it becomes more of an issue for Mr. Poilievre to go read the report? I know he wants to be able to speak freely, but doesn't this suggest that maybe he needs to take some actions that might be more important than his ability to throw bombs in question period?
No, I think, look, leader of the opposition position is a House of Commons position where it's
Friend
his
of the
job
show,
to
David
ask
Cochran.
questions in the House and push the government.
I know he's friend of the
on
show,
things.
but I just like the guy.
It's not a backroom job where you sit there and sit down with the government and read the reports and then advise them on things. That's not how our system works. It's his job to be.
No,
in the House of
but
Commons.
I disagree. At big moments it is. At the Gulf War, the leaders of the opposition who did not possess Privy Council, PC behind their name, like Audrey McLaughlin, were granted Privy Councillor status so they could be brief. There is precedent for times of high crisis where, and if everybody's going to lean in and put their own country first, where you would do that. I mean, Dominic LeBlanc could not answer some of David Cochran's questions today because of that oath. And there's a reason for that. We would all want to see that this, when it's pursued legally, it lands and justice is served. You don't have that opportunity when you're a prime minister to pick and choose what briefings you're going to take.
Okay, a quick last word from we'll go Mel first and then Frank, because I'm going to move on. I got Richard Fadden standing by. Mel?
Yeah, just obviously what we saw today is what I'll give credit to the government. They're taking this seriously, as they should. So obviously we're going to wait to see what happens in the next few days. But
One sec.
again, I'll go back to the death of a Canadian soil, period. That should be all
Multiple
anybody's.
Canadians, it seems.
Multiple Canadians. And even, death obviously being important, but more than that, if Canadians are feeling threatened here, that's paramount importance, and that's the way that it should be taken.
Fred?
Look, this is an incredibly serious issue. India is a huge trading partner of our country. $8 billion goes back and forward. But it's a Canadian being murdered by a foreign government obviously trumps all of that, and the government needs to really dig into this.
Yeah, Dominic LeBlanc said there are a dozen cities working with the RCMP, a dozen smaller police forces, and the arrests and the numbers we heard today shows you the extent of it. All right, thanks for coming in. I hope you at least got some turkey. Melanie Richer, Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, or ham, as they do in Ontario. Thanks so much. All right, so as we've been discussing, Canada has ejected 6 Indian diplomats after the RCMP revealed their link to homicides and violence in
Oh, wait. There's another one I was going to pull out. Oh, yeah, here it is. This is a very interesting
other
interview.
Indian diplomats. And the RCMP says it has evidence linking them to criminal activity, including homicides. India has responded by kicking out 6 members of Canada's diplomatic mission there. Here is BC Premier David Eby reacting to the news.
I'm profoundly concerned about the safety of the Sikh community. I know there are many people on hearing this news who are concerned about their own safety. There are others who are wondering, how is this possible that the government of India could potentially be involved in this kind of violent activity in Canada? What I can assure the Sikh community, what I can assure everybody in British Columbia and in Canada, is that as far as the RCMP are involved, we will make sure that they have all of the resources necessary to protect different communities in our province from foreign interference, and also to make sure that they hold those involved in Canada accountable for any action threatening a British Columbian, an Ontarian, an Albertan, or a Canadian.
Ujjal Dosanjh is a former Premier of British Columbia, and he joins me now. Mr. Dosanjh, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining the show today.
It's getting less money now?
To be with you.
2022?
It's been an hour-by-hour series of developments. What's your reaction of where we are right now?
Well, it's extraordinary that you have so much evidence being presented by the RCMP of extortion of builders and contractors and then threats to people's lives. And that's really not acceptable as a Canadian. And I believe that, when the prosecution proceeds, things might come to light that might still shock us. And I'm pleased that the RCMP have been able to do what they've been able to do. The diplomatic tit for tat really doesn't concern ordinary Canadians or ordinary Indians. I mean, nations do that to each other. But we still have a relationship. It's an important relationship between the two countries, but obviously it is at its lowest ebb. I've never seen it like this, even after the nuclear tests that Canada really didn't like when India, exploded a nuclear bomb sometime in the 90s, and the relations became cooler. But I've never seen it like this. But not to say that what India is doing is acceptable, but for the violence, which is violence opposite to the Khalistani extremism and violence that's been in Canada, I'm not surprised. People get tired because what happens is that you have had from Air India and from before Air India, and to date, Khalistani extremists have been able to function with hate speech, violent hate speeches within the temples, outside the temples, without any action from the government of India.
With the government of India or the government of Canada, sir? You say government of India.
The government of Canada.
Yeah,
Right.
a bit of a Freudian slip on that
and
one.
And the Prime Minister has, from the day he took power, from the day he ran for leadership, he's been surrounded by the Khalistanis. They've been in his cabinet. They've been in his inner circle.
Names when they say
he now has an alliance with Mr. Jameet Singh, who is a Khalistani himself.
Have you not been paying attention? He doesn't have any alliance with Jameet Singh anymore.
Suggesting he's violent, but many Khalistanis have perpetrated violence on the community for a long time, including Air India. Not much has been done. Canada has failed.
Right.
I'm not suggesting India is right to do what it's doing. But we need to examine our own actions in defending ordinary Canadians that are under threat from the Khalistani extremism, as we are doing to those that are under threat from Indian violence by the government of India.
But if people are committing hate speech and there's a complaint about it, it should be investigated and people should be charged. But we're talking about speech being met with bullets, right? In these sorts of circumstances, there's no evidence.
If Cochrane expected
the government of Canada, I appreciate this has been a long-held view by some members of your community that they have been way too soft on this and that they've allowed it to fester. But I wonder though, what do you make of?
That's the truth. I mean, that is the truth. That's incontestable.
This is the former
truth. You tell me how it's
BC
wrong.
Premier.
I'm not arguing with you. I was just
Dosanjh.
summarizing. I'm curious, what you make of the actions today,
he was
the expulsion of the diplomats.
Premier
Whether you
of
think
BC,
this government had any choice other
they were
than
bringing on
do
to respond to a current Premier of BC.
As Canadians, we had no choice. And India retaliated as India would do. They have their compulsions and we have our own. We have to defend our people. All I'm saying is the government of Canada, the RCMP, the institutions in Canada have been very selective in defending people.
Well, then, yeah,
they have not defended people that have been threatened violently and otherwise.
Well, because they're next going to go and speak to
for a long time.
An advocate for the Sikh
and that's
community.
Not to justify what government of India is alleged to be doing. It's
both
absolutely
sides
wrong.
Kind of thing.
But the thing is, we have a double standard in this world.
You know what I mean?
America can go blow off anybody in any place of the world. It's justified. India does that.
This was the goddamn insane comparison.
Yes, we have a double standard in this world. America can go blow off anybody in any place of the world, it's justified. India does that, it's not justified. Neither is justified from my point of view. But the fact is, might is right.
We live in a time
Am
of
I right or
wolves,
not?
people.
Well, I mean,
Ultimately, I'm not suggesting Canada has done anything wrong to India.
Right.
But Canada has
All right.
certainly
Thanks
not
for hanging out,
stood
Herschel.
by its own people when whose safety has been violated or threatened by the Khalistanis in this country.
So,
and that's something nobody's looked at. Nobody cares about.
So what more should Canada be doing there? Just because we're getting tight on time. What more is it you wanted to see Canada do? I mean, I was a young man when Air India happened. But what would you like to see
Canada
since?
needs to stand up and say to the Khalistanis, please stop engaging in hate and violent speech within the temples. Stop threatening other people, and perhaps stop trying to dismember a friendly country, which was quite friendly until about 2 or 3 years ago. So I think ultimately
that's an interesting choice of words.
Canadians need to take some responsibility
Dismember
about the situation where it's
to
at.
refer to
Nothing
an
justifies
independence
government
movement.
of India's actions, alleged or otherwise. But I'm not suggesting the government of India is right just because they're angry now at the situation they're doing this. Absolutely wrong, improper.
So
I'll be the first one to condemn that. I've always done that.
So help me understand.
It's funny how
I was going to say, help me understand, Mr. Dessange, what is it Canada
but now he's
isn't
getting
doing
sucked back
that
in.
The United Kingdom, the United States, Australia are doing, because we've seen similar incidents of transnational repression in those countries, including a murder for hire plot in the United States last year as well. What is it those countries are doing that Canada isn't doing?
You have in Australia or in the United States, you haven't seen the kind of violence and extremism that you've seen in Canada. Way from 1980s and from 1984 onwards. We have never tried to understand this situation. This situation involved brown people killing each other. And the politicians, by and large, didn't give a damn. Trudeau definitely didn't give a damn. Trudeau is surrounded by the Khalistanis. He's considered a Khalistani.
Name one.
And that's not to say that he is, but you're known by your friends.
Ujjal Dosanjh, former Premier of British Columbia, we appreciate you joining us today, sir. Thank you.
It is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could
Trudeau, the well-known
engage
Khalistani,
in supporting criminal activity against Canadians.
I'm sure if I think about it, I can probably figure out who they're implying, but I would like them to say it. I'd like them to say who they're accusing.
Here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violence.
Well, no, because they're saying in the cabinet, obviously Singh, but there's also clearly people in the cabinet that are accusing as well, which is kind of funny, because you could the Sikh diaspora or community or representative or whoever could probably make the same aspersions in the other direction, and it gets gross either way.
Violent acts is absolutely unacceptable for any country, any democracy that upholds the rule of law. Canada fully accepts and respects the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We expect India to do the same. In this case, they did not.
Balpreet Singh is legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada, and he joins me now. Mr. Singh, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here today.
I would assume so.
Good to be with you.
When the RCMP held a news conference today, they said they were taking the extraordinary step of going public like this due to the significant threat to public safety in our country. How do you interpret those concerns from the RCMP Commissioner?
I don't think so.
We've been living with this for the past 4 decades, Indian interference and targeting Sikhs in Canada. But over the past few months, we've seen a rise in violence targeting Sikh activists. So we've seen Sikh activists with their houses being shot up. We've seen extortion rings targeting Sikh businesses. And we knew where this was coming from. But to hear that from the RCMP and from the Prime Minister, that's meaningful. But I mean, the government of India being tied up with organized crime, that's a serious thing, and we've been the victims of it.
So these examples of violence targeting the members of the Sikh community didn't subside after the allegation the Prime Minister made in Parliament last year, didn't subside after the arrests in the Niger killing in May. You say they've only gotten worse and worse.
So in conversations with law enforcement, and as you can imagine, we've had a number of them, we were told that as opposed to being daunted by the Niger announcement, India was still actively pursuing its targets. And who are the targets? A lot of them are people born and raised in Canada, just like me, but they talk about Khalistan, which is Sikh state, Sikh sovereignty, and they're organizing referendums on the question of Khalistan. And this is enough for the government of India to try and kill them, to silence them.
The move today to expel 6 diplomats that Canada says was involved, the Prime Minister's words in this were pretty unequivocal. There was no "we believe, we suspect." It was a statement of fact that the High Commissioner and the 5 other subordinate diplomats were playing a role in a growing criminal organization, as they call it. This is a disruption tactic. Does this make you feel any safer? Do you think this has gone far enough?
You know, since the Mullet killing, since the Niger assassination,
it's not a joke.
We have said, the community has repeatedly said, that the trail will lead to the High Commission and to the consulates. These entities have vast networks of proxies who monitor Sikhs, who target Sikhs. So to cut the head off, which seems like what's happened here, at least in Canada, maybe it'll have an effect. But this is coming right from the top. This is coming from India directly. And like I said, their network of proxies is still very active here. So they've gotten rid of some diplomats, but will that solve the problem? I highly doubt it.
Network of proxies. Are we talking people in the community? Are you talking people with maybe political?
I don't think so. Probably not. Though they do have Quebec embassies in France, and they're nice. Some of the buildings they get to use are some of them are nicer than the Canadian embassy. I think there's one picture I was looking at, and it's not like an actual embassy. It's like I think it's in the same vein as the Taiwan Cultural and Economic Office. Not to compare to China to Canada to China or Quebec to Taiwan. I just think the name of whatever the thing they have in France is in the vein of a cultural and economic development office or whatever. And there was one I was looking at, and it's the one they had because it was when Trudeau was over there, and Blanchette I think was over there too, and the building they have is was nicer than the actual Canadian embassy building.
Political loyalties to the Modi government or just to the state of India? What are you talking about there when you talk about political proxy, sir?
There's a mixed bag here. So there are some people who have loyalty to the Modi government who are acting, but you have others who are basically people who want visas to India, who are being threatened, who are being coerced into saying, well, just do this one thing for us.
Oh,
Go to this
shit.
event.
How did I forget the Charles de Gaulle line? I'm so dumb. Yeah, no, yes. Vive le Québec libre, long live free Quebec, was a phrase in a speech delivered by French President Charles de Gaulle in Montreal, Quebec in 1967 during the official visit to Canada for Expo 67's World's Fair. The speech caused a diplomatic incident with the government of Canada and was condemned by Canadian Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, saying that Canadians do not need to be liberated. In France, though, many were sympathetic to the cause of Quebec nationalism. De Gaulle's speech was criticized as a breach of protocol. I just think it's just on its face, comparing Quebec nationalists to Khalistanis is just I think an objectively funny comparison. Yes, both are nominally nationalist movements, but I think that there's not a whole lot of other obviously the all of the just themes and similarities that are part of nationalism, but I think it's just, there's probably examples that are closer to each other that you could use.
And take some pictures, give us some names, and you get your
Trudeau
visa.
is surrounded by
So
Quebecois.
that problem's not going away. I mean, our community has ties to Punjab,
my
has
God.
ties to India.
Trudeau's surrounded by Quebecois. There's so many Quebecois in his cabinet. He's considered one himself.
Getting a visa to India is the main way India uses people against their own communities.
That sounds like a very difficult
oh my
thing
God,
to
we've
police.
uncovered it.
Bad behavior by diplomats. They can find evidence, they can investigate, they can do the allegation,
Oh my
and
God,
then
that's so
expel
good.
them from the country, as you saw today. But that sort of
I told you it was a
within
funny
the community
comparison.
tactic brought on by
Just
pressure
there's
is a
so
difficult
much
thing to deal with.
content
So
you
what
can
else
mine out
can
of
the
it.
government, what else can the RCMP do at this point, in your view?
Well, first of all, we've seen this repeatedly. So whenever there's a Khalistan demonstration, even at Hardeep Singh Nijjar's funeral, there was an individual who was caught sending video and pictures to senior police officials in India. He was turned over to the police, and the police quickly took him to the side, and apparently he was released. So there's no repercussions here for engaging in that sort of foreign interference and targeting of Sikhs. Really, the law should be able to capture these sort of things. But on a bigger level, what we're seeing is that this isn't just affecting Sikhs in Canada. We're seeing Sikhs in the US, the UK, Australia, all being targeted by these criminal organizations with ties to the Indian government. Our Five Eyes networks, the G7, they all need to come together and say this is not acceptable. There needs to be a real reevaluation of our relationships with India. India is basically a rogue state, a hostile state that's engaging in extraterritorial killings. So this really needs to stop, and I think there needs to be a united response to it.
Well, we've had the expulsion from here and the expulsion from India. Stuart Wheeler, who is a charge d'affaires, and 5 others have been expelled from India. I mean, how do you, as a middle power like Canada, with significant cultural and economic ties to India, I'm in no way saying they shouldn't take action when a state is accused of an extraterritorial murder. How do you do it in a way that has meaning when the leverage is so lopsided here? Canada is not the United States or even the United Kingdom when it comes to their ability to squeeze a country like India.
What we've seen when it comes to Canada dealing with Russia or China has been a pretty strong and united front. Political parties understand that there needs to be a united front, and having interactions with diplomats from those countries is fraught with danger, and people are doing it very carefully. We haven't seen the same when it comes to India. For some reason, there's this notion that India is still the world's largest democracy. The fact is, India has tilted towards authoritarianism for a very long time. And even after the Nijjar announcement, we saw, I'll say it frankly, the Canadian Conservative Party, senior leadership, including the leader, attending events for the overseas BJP and sitting beside the Indian High Commissioner. That was hurtful to our community. We need to treat India just like we treat other hostile countries.
I've got about 30 seconds left before I lose the show. Are you worried about further escalation in the wake of this? Are you worried about retaliation against members of your community and your organization?
Look, we are not afraid of India. The Indians thought that killing members of our community would silence us on Khalistan about human rights issues. That hasn't happened. Khalistan advocacy is at a 40-year high, to be honest. But at the end of the day, this is on Canada. Canada needs to take a strong stand, and I don't know if we need to once again reset our relationship with India. It can't be carte blanche. There has to be a principle behind it, and killing Canadians is not acceptable.
Balpreet Singh, legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. We're out of time, but I want to thank you for joining me today.
The guy, or I forget who the other guy is that sometimes does. I think it might be the guy who asked the question of the RCMP today. Balpreet. No, that was Balpreet. Sandhu. Jaskaran Sandhu. He might also, I think he's another legal representative for the World Sikh Organization. Or I might be getting that wrong. But anyway, they will absolutely be asking about this, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so silly to think this is somehow a smokescreen for that. Oh. God damn it, we're reading the Iverson piece. Someone send that to me. I want to read it. John Iveson, Canada and India need to call swift end to their diplomatic war. While Canada has arguably provided space for extremists, it is equally apparent that the Modi government has been engaging in illicit acts to stamp out opposition. Canada is at war, diplomatically at least, with of all countries, India. I don't know. I don't know if we've even in the diplomatic sense if we've currently gotten to the level of war, particularly because the whole point of these sort of diplomatic spats is so we don't have a bunch of wars breaking out constantly. This is the India that fought alongside Canada against the Japanese and Germans. That was nearly a century. That's 80 years ago, John. A fellow democracy, and like we're talking about, it's 2024. Come back to the present. Fellow democracy and member of the Commonwealth that is an ostensible ally against authoritarian states like China. Yet relations between the two countries have just turned from bad to worse, with neither government apparently in any hurry to make nice. What else happened, John? What else happened? It feels like you're burying the lead here. I can't put my finger on what the thing is that you're not mentioning in the first few sentences that I would have thought would have been a lead. Oh, here we go. The latest chapter in a saga that is becoming increasingly personal. Again, why did it become personal? I can think of one person in particular that it got real personal for. Was written on Sunday when the Indian government released a scathing statement that said New Delhi had received a note from Canada suggesting that its High Commissioner in Ottawa, Sanjay Kumar Verma, and other diplomats are persons of interest in the investigation into the killing of Canada's into the killing in Canada last year of a Sikh separatist. It still isn't mentioned until the very last sentence of the fourth graph. Holy you're right, Nathaniel. I didn't even think about that. There's the raw. I mean, Canada wasn't even federated at that point. We were all just we were all. When did we get independence? Oh no, I'm mixing that up with yeah, okay, never mind, ignore me. Still very funny. All right, the statement rejected these preposterous imputations and blamed the political agenda of Justin Trudeau's government, which it said is centered around vote bank politics in the Sikh community. The Indians said the Canadian government has still not shared any evidence, leaving no doubt in the mind of the recently re-elected government of Narendra Modi that this is a deliberate strategy of smearing India for political gains. To what end? To what end? In remarkably undiplomatic language, the statement said that Trudeau's hostility to India has long been in evidence following his ill-starred visit to the subcontinent in 2018. His cabinet has included individuals who have openly associated with... Okay, we've read of this. So he says it out loud that it's about Jagmeet Singh, obviously. New Delhi once again accused Trudeau's government of providing space for violent extremists and terrorists to threaten Indians in Canada. All of these activities have been justified in the name of freedom of speech, it said. I don't know, I thought that was something the National Post cared about. Multiple extradition requests from the government of India in respect of terrorists and organized crime leaders living in Canada have been disregarded. The statement said the aspersions cast on the Indian High Commissioner in Ottawa are ludicrous and that India reserves the right to take further steps. Many of the allegations against Trudeau are familiar and some are valid. But so, it appears, are the counter-arguments made by the RCMP in a highly unusual public statement. This is, I'm pretty sure about right here as he's writing. When he was writing and he got to here, that's when the RCMP announced its press conference. It's said because there's the difference between his tweet early in the morning and later on after the press conference is very funny. It said an extraordinary situation compelled it to speak about what has been discovered in its multiple ongoing investigations into the murder of Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar and other incidents that involved agents of the government of India engaging in serious criminal activity in Canada. It is not a normal process to publicly disclose information about ongoing investigations. All right, we've read all this. The Mounties said that law enforcement in Canada has, on more than a dozen occasions, had to warn members of the South Asian community, and specifically members of the pro-Khalistan movement, about credible and imminent threats to their lives. The suggestion is that Singh Nijjar's murder was not an isolated case. The RCMP said that a senior Canadian law officer, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, and of Foreign Affairs met with Indian officials on the weekend to present evidence about the involvement of Indian agents in homicides and violent acts, as well as interference in the democratic process and the use of organized crime to target South Asian communities. Those are remarkable allegations to make without providing evidence. What can be said about it? Well, I mean, Nijjar is dead. What can be said about it? It should be remembered that Trudeau raised the temperature last year when he told the House of Commons that Canada had credible evidence of Indian involvement in a murder, effectively labeling Modi an accessory in homicide. The Indian government responded with allegations about vote bank politics that are not entirely baseless. A man is dead. Trudeau has allowed diaspora politics to unduly influence foreign policy, pledging that Sikh values are Canadian values at events and failing to crack down on do you protest? Are they not Canadian values, Iverson? Failing to crack down on suspected Khalistani extremists living in Canada. India's National Investigation Agency has identified individuals in Canada it accuses of extortion, terrorism, and smuggling and money laundering. It has sought their extradition, but to no avail. On the it's interesting that there's no sort of like he couches his language a lot less when he presents the Indian side of this story. Canada has allowed Sikh extremism to flourish, such as the Khalistani parade float that celebrated the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi that toured the streets of Toronto in 2023. The government claims that it is powerless because of the Charter rights that protect free speech. So, do you disagree with this? Do you think that these people should have been arrested, Iverson? That the Charter of Rights does not protect free speech of this kind? But the Charter does not explain why law enforcement has apparently turned a blind eye to worse excesses. The Indian government alleges that Nijjar ran a terror training camp for the militant Khalistani Tiger Force in Mission, BC, yet he was not arrested nor charged. Maybe because there wasn't any evidence that he was doing that. One former Liberal foreign policy advisor, Omar Aziz, wrote in the Globe and Mail that the reason the Trudeau government did not clamp down on Khalistani financing or activists was that the Prime Minister didn't want to lose the Sikh vote to Jagmeet Singh, so he dug in our heels. While Canada has arguably provided space for extremists, it is equally apparent that the Modi government has been engaging in illicit acts to stamp out opposition. Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party was re-elected in June, in part because of his Hindu national... Oh, wait, what happened? Okay. Hindu nationalism agenda that includes standing up to Western neo-colonialism. Modi played on the image of... It's interesting that this isn't... Usually colonialism would have been in quote tweets in the National Post. Modi played on the image of being a strong man willing to defend national security, even if it meant going outside India's borders. Revelations in the Washington Post earlier this year that officers in India's Foreign Intelligence Agency were linked to the Nijjar murder and a plot to kill his New York-based associate, Gurpatwant Singh Panan, were dismissed without apology in New Delhi. The Post story said the Biden administration, conscious of its need for India to act as a counterweight to China, said the U.S. would refrain from a punitive response if India held those responsible to account. The approach was viewed as too accommodating by some U.S. officials, but it contained the fallout. But is that an does that seem like acceptable? You know who you are. Oh, who just followed? I missed that. I'm sorry. Oh no, I can't even look at. Who just followed? Kickstream just followed. Oh well, thank you for the follow. India's importance in a world that is cleaving into two camps is undeniable, and politicians in both Canada and India need to focus on their common agenda and turn down the heat. Oh, it's still there. You may have deleted Kevin, but Pepperidge Farm remembers. Pepperidge Farm in the National Post. Independent Toronto MP Ken Vuong posted on X that the latest spat with India comes 2 days before Trudeau's back on the stand with the foreign interference inquiry. He said Canada's strategic interests are being more just selfish, short-term, but to what end? Who cares? How does what are you implying? It was a change the Indian government also made, saying that the allegations being made served the anti-India separatist agenda that the Trudeau government has constantly pandered for narrow political gains. It is very much to be hoped that the RCMP has not allowed itself to be used for such blatantly partisan purposes. It seems very unlikely that that happens. John? What is happening? Sorry. Goddamn. Green screen was falling on top of me. Regardless, the Prime Minister would be well advised to bite his tongue. A man is dead. Make conciliatory noises on the stand and leave the murder Have some national pride, my man. India is a flawed democracy, which has seen the erosion of individual rights and freedoms of speech under Modi. But we are a like-minded democracy, so we're a flawed democracy that, by and large, shares an agenda when it comes to promoting the rules-based. Clearly, they're not. How is what is being alleged show that India is committed to a rules-based order? It is simply not in Canada's interest to be at odds with New Delhi, and the first step to restoring a constructive bilateral relationship is for our politicians to stop trying to manipulate it for political advantage. A man is dead, John. It's a very silly thing that he wrote. But that's what I mean, where it's like, it very much feels like he started writing this in the morning, and then he had to reconstitute it around what the RCMP shared.
With pre-COVID.
Oh, national. Okay, 1 second. My second government-mandated little reporter's trip.
Tonight, India is accused of widespread violence on Canadian soil.
It is absolutely unacceptable.
Ottawa expels India's diplomats. India does the same as the RCMP goes public with stunning allegations.
Homicides, extortions, and other acts of violence.
Why police say Canadians are still at risk. Donald Trump sparks outrage after threatening to use the military against Americans.
He's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Separated by war, the Palestinian babies being raised in an Israeli hospital.
Do you think Saida knows her mother?
No. The difficult choice facing their parents in Gaza.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Canada is leveling serious and shocking allegations against the Indian government tonight. In a rare move, the RCMP went public with an ongoing investigation linking Indian diplomats and consular officials with violent criminal activity on Canadian soil. The federal government says it moved quickly, expelling 6 top diplomats from India, including the High Commissioner. Mounties say they're persons of interest in crimes like extortion, harassment, even killings, and evidence points to a significant threat to Canadian public safety. So the allegations detailed by the RCMP paint a picture of widespread violence and coercion targeting the South Asian community and further straining relations between Canada and India. Katie Nicholson begins our coverage tonight.
Outside India's Foreign Office, even in the dark, it was clear diplomatic tensions had spilled over.
Canada has provided credible, irrefutable evidence of ties between agents of the government of India and a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
In an extraordinary moment of transparency, the RCMP, usually loath to comment on active investigations, weighed in.
The team has learned a significant amount of information about the breadth and depth of criminal activity orchestrated by agents of the government of India.
And more than a dozen threats of violence leveled at members of the South Asian community.
There is credible evidence that the government of India, through agents in Canada, has been involved in homicides, plural.
One of the homicides in question, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who supported the movement for Khalistan, an independent Sikh state, gunned down in his pickup in Surrey last year. Canada expelled 6 diplomats it says are implicated in criminal activity. India said it told them to come home because they were no longer safe in Canada. In a statement, the government of India said it strongly rejects these preposterous imputations and ascribes them to the political agenda of the Trudeau government that is centered around vote bank politics.
We don't want to be having this fight, but obviously the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil is not something that we can ignore as a country.
Despite the expulsion of the diplomats, skepticism 6 will be any safer in Canada.
The Indian consulates and embassies, they have their people on the ground. They have people that they work through. So those networks are still intact. So will it have a major impact on the violence facing 6? I have my doubts.
Diplomatic relations with India have already been frosty.
This is going to put them in the icebox.
This former national security advisor to the Prime Minister's office says there's little Canada can do to hold the diplomats accountable.
The bottom line is, in the course of history, this is not rare. During the Cold War, everybody spied against everybody else, and the only thing that we could do is kick people out and be more careful about whom we let back in.
In a little tit-for-tat, India did some expulsion of its own. It's given 6 Canadian diplomats until the 19th to leave the country.
Canada used our military on our citizens. We just don't talk about it. I mean, what was the one? What's the one I think about? Did we use the Canadian military in the Oka crisis? Oh, I thought you guys were talking about like something. Because, yes, but also, like, wasn't that the military when we sent it? Was there actual tanks in Quebec at some point during FLQ, or is that just something they said Harper wanted to do? Was that the Canadian military they sent in too? Yeah, That was the Canadian military that got sent in there too, right? Fun fact, I need to find what the character's name is. The girl who plays Tanis in Letterkenny? This girl?
Who's this? That's Tanis, my daughter.
Fun, well, no, not a fun Canadian fact, but an interesting one, I guess, nonetheless. Tanis's older sister is the woman who got stabbed at the Oka crisis. That's Tanis. That's fucking Tanis. Insanely small world. One day this girl will grow up to be on Letterkenny. It's just an insane thing that's true.
Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
It's a very strange heritage
reaction
minute
from our
for you there.
reporters in both Canada and India tonight. David Cochrane is in Ottawa, while Salima Shivji joins us from Mumbai. So let's start in the nation's capital. David, let's talk timing here. Why did the RCMP and the federal government take action right now?
Well, Adrian, what's driving this was what Mike Duhem, the commissioner, talked about, that significant threat to public safety, that in spite of the Prime Minister's allegations of India's involvement a year ago in September, the arrest...
They really screwed up this man's... Like, I thought they screwed up my Thanksgiving Monday. This man has been working overtime today.
Made in the Niger killing in May, that the violence just continued and was in fact escalating. More threats, more extortions. There are 13 duty of care wards active right now. That is when the RCMP gets information that someone's life is imminently in danger. So it just shows how much it had been escalating. So they decided to confront India with the evidence they had of the involvement of their diplomats. And Adrian, it led to this extraordinary meeting where the Deputy Minister of Global Affairs, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, and one of the Deputy Commissioners of the RCMP flew all the way to Singapore to present the evidence to Narendra Modi's National Security Advisor. And the evidence was essentially rejected out of hand. It became very clear India wasn't going to stop. It became very clear India wasn't going to cooperate.
He's working overtime to distract from the deposition.
In the interest of public safety, they were left with no choice for the police to go public with their warnings and for the federal government to issue the expulsion orders to the Indian diplomats.
And can you walk us through what these 6 diplomats are actually being accused of?
Yeah, so it's the High Commissioner from India to Canada and 5 other diplomats, and essentially Canada believes that they were involved in collecting intelligence. The pictures of Sikh activists who supported independent Khalistan, their names, their associates, their pattern of life, their pattern of movements, and then sending that information back to India. Now, they aren't suspected of necessarily contracting the people who are believed to have pulled the trigger in some of these cases, but they were feeding the information that was giving them a menu of options. And the thing that struck me today, Adrian, was the Prime Minister's language. There was no qualification, there was no prevarication, it was just a clear certainty that they believe 100% India was behind this, and that's why they kicked those 6 diplomats out of the country just before 9 o'clock this morning.
All right, David Cochrane in Ottawa. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
See you around, Discount.
And let's go to CBC South Asia.
Also, I'll take this moment. If you want to follow, if you haven't already followed, or if you have the extra money lying around, you want to kick a subscription my way on Twitch, on YouTube, like and subscribe is free. I'm trying to build up the followers there. I don't think there's anyone watching on YouTube right now, but you never know. If you got Twitch Prime, you got a free one. I'd appreciate that too, or any couple of biddies. We're just trying to keep the lights on and the pantry stocked.
Asia correspondent Salima Shibji in Mumbai now. So, Salima, India's response so far seems pretty consistent with its past reactions.
That's right. India's reaction to this serious escalation in allegations was predictable in its fury. That strident and extremely angry tone to the statements from India's foreign ministry really very much in line with previous declarations from this government. And this time, again, a flat-out rejection of the claims. So what India is calling preposterous and part of Justin Trudeau's political agenda. And it's worth noting that India basically came out with a statement first to get ahead of the news, whereas Ottawa has been trying and preferring to find quieter, more diplomatic channels to resolve this dispute. India then announced that it was withdrawing its High Commissioner to Ottawa, as well as 5 other diplomats, when in fact Canadian government officials say that they were expelled first because India had refused to waive diplomatic immunity so that police could interview them.
And Salima, how is all of this playing out there?
Well, that narrative, basically, that India recalled its envoy to Canada because of safety reasons and that it then kicked out Canadian diplomats in retaliation, that has been a top headline here in many newspapers and the preferred narrative for some. And that is what India is focused on in this diplomatic fight. Basically, what Indians believe in this, that their country is taking a strong stance towards Canada, long accused by the Indian government of harboring pro-Khalistani extremists. And with diplomatic ties eroding further, India certainly isn't inclined to back down.
All right, Salima Shibji in Mumbai. Thanks, Salima. As Trudeau took questions about India, the focus turned to his future. He was asked in French if he will lead the Liberal Party in the next federal election.
Oui. Should we play some video games?
The news conference was over. The question comes after reporting this week that as many as 20 Liberal MPs signed a pledge calling for Trudeau to
Shaft
step
of the
aside
100 biddies. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
To the Middle East now, where Israel is facing fresh calls for restraint after a deadly day in Gaza. Palestinian authorities say at least 24 people were killed after strikes at targeted sites where the displaced were being fed and cared for.
2 pieces of world.
Cam McIntosh shows us the aftermath.
Every little bit counts.
The Israeli airstrike hit in the morning, setting this tent compound for displaced Palestinians on fire at a hospital complex in central Gaza. The light of day revealing most of it burned to the ground. These images were taken by a freelance videographer working for CBC News. My daughters were burned on their legs, says Mohammed Musli. Everything was burned. Nothing is left. People get treated at hospitals. Here we get burned at hospitals, says Mahmoud Wadi. The Palestinian Health Authority says 4 people were killed, at least 70 injured. Not far away, Israel also hitting a compound at a UN-run school. The UN says at least 20 people were killed, including a 1-year-old infant and his mother. In statements, the Israeli military said the strikes were aimed at Hamas targets embedded among civilians. This after the UN reported an attack in northern Gaza on a UN food distribution center. Israel says that shelling is under review.
The Secretary General condemns the large number of civilian casualties in the intensifying Israeli campaign.
The UN calling out Israel on the civilian deaths. The school that was struck was to be part of a UN-run polio vaccination campaign. The lowest right of a Palestinian child is to have access to vaccination, says Ruba Abu Al-Khair, one of many displaced people to bring her children to central Gaza. Hamas, the Israel Defense Forces, and UN have agreed to coordinate short pauses in fighting to allow safe passage to the clinics. The UN trying to vaccinate about 600,000 children under the age of 10.
The only thing that will stop us succeeding in the second round is if the pauses that have been agreed do not hold.
Already proving to be a tenuous prospect as fighting in Gaza shows no sign of slowing. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
It's not just Gaza feeling that force. Today, Israel fired further north into Lebanon than it has in this conflict. At least 21 people died, according to health officials there. Those are rescuers combing through the rubble, searching for survivors in the town of Aitu, where most of the population is Christian. The strike hit a house that had been rented to displaced families, according to the town's mayor. Briar Stewart is in Jerusalem with more on the Israeli offensive. So, Briar, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just hours ago said Israel will continue to strike at Hezbollah throughout Lebanon without mercy, he said.
Well, that's right, Adrian. That strike in northern Lebanon was the largest to hit the country Monday, but it was far from the only one. And as Israel continues what it calls its war on Hezbollah, the country is vowing retaliation for a drone strike on a military base here. A drone crashed into a dining hall, killing 4 Israeli soldiers, wounding dozens of others. Now, there was no siren or alarm at the time, and the fact that the drone could evade Israel's sophisticated missile defense system shows just what a threat the weapons are. They are smaller, they move slower and fly lower to the ground, and much different than the missiles that these systems are designed to intercept.
And Briar, when you talk about Israel's defense system, it sounds like it's getting more help from the U.S.
It is. The U.S. is sending Israel an advanced missile defense system, and it's designed to intercept ballistic missiles either below or above the Earth's atmosphere, meaning it could shoot down missiles coming in from Iran or Yemen. And it is a
that doesn't
move
bode
because the U.S. is not just sending the equipment, but also 100 troops to operate it. So it really is a sign of Washington's deepening involvement in this expanding war.
All right, Briar Stewart in Jerusalem tonight. Thanks, Briar. And on the U.S. campaign trail tonight, Donald Trump refused to distance himself from his comments, suggesting the military should be used against some Americans on Election Day. Katie Simpson now with what he said and the concerns over the increasingly dark tone of the campaign.
Keep forgetting. This is how. Honestly, I don't even know if this is a compliment to Canadian politics, but it's been a while since Canadian politics has managed to drown out my awareness of American politics, particularly the presidential election.
An energetic crowd cheering for Donald Trump. No concerns among his base about
By
the
that,
Republican
I mean, I just haven't
nominee's
checked in
increasingly
since, like,
violent
Thursday.
rhetoric.
I think the bigger
Everything
problem
since,
is the enemy
like,
from
Thursday
within.
afternoon.
During an appearance on Fox News Sunday Futures, he was asked about the possibility of chaos on Election Day and mused about using force against his perceived enemies.
We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Trump is embracing authoritarian talking points, previously claiming he'd like to be a dictator for a day, while also using dehumanizing language about migrants. It's all part of an alarming record, Democrats say.
He wants to send the military after American citizens. Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged.
Kamala Harris spent her campaign day trying to make inroads with black men, amid fear from Democrats she's not connecting enough.
Yes, I am concerned about black men staying home or voting for Trump.
Harris went on multiple talk shows, bringing up how Trump was sued as a landlord for refusing black tenants and for his role in spreading birther conspiracy theories about Barack Obama.
And now you look at black immigrants, legal immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, and he gets on a debate stage and says they're eating their pets? Come on. This man is dangerous.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Sean Diddy Combs is facing at least 6 new lawsuits tonight, accusing him of rape, sexual assault, and molesting a teenage boy. Lawyers say the alleged victims are part of a group of more than 100 people who are in the process of taking legal action against him. Combs is in custody facing separate criminal charges, including sex trafficking.
I need to get up early tomorrow, so I think we're just going to raid.
He married Chad Kroger.
Yeah, that's so
was
rough.
many moons ago. Yeah, so she was dating Tyga too.
Wow. Some people.
I don't know if we're gonna raid that. I don't know if that's what's going on there. Is there anyone good that we can raid? You know what? We're gonna. If there's anyone doing not insane stuff on politics, we'll maybe raid someone on politics. But I've noticed that some of the other political panels tend to be a little bit, I don't know, weird.
Why?
Screw it. Go bother. I'm really important.
What in the world,
Unhinged
man?
politics on Twitch politics. I probably should. I shouldn't be
Strange.
surprised. You're right. That's a real.
I fucking love the idea that people are
inside
voting
kind of
for this
thing.
clown. It literally hypes me up every time I see Trump, because of the derangement and stupidity.
Well,
how do I do this raid thing?
I don't know, man.
No.
Did Kamala Harris say dude?
Under my economic plan, and by the way, you know,
All right, there we go.
Dude
All
wants
right.
to talk about his plans, which really are about cutting taxes for the richest people. Please do.
What is it?
Yes.
I'm really important. Just all
I call everybody dude. California represent. Kamala
Have a good night,
Harris
everybody. Thanks for
called
hanging
Trump
out.
Dude.
He's not allowing raids. Are you kidding me? You know what? Screw it. I tried to help, but
about cutting taxes for the richest people. Please.
You guys go watch whatever you want. I'm gonna go get ready for bed. Thanks for hanging out. Good night. Good luck. See y'all when I see you. Have we not stopped?